Alright. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and get started. Where am I? There I am. Here I be. Here I be, and this be me. Here I be, and me you see. I'll be real with y'all, I'm tired. I'm I've got sleepy, I've got the sleepy disease. I've got sleepy disease. It's terminal, it can't be cured. All I can do is manage it. I appreciate your sympathy. With that said, I figured things are probably going to be kind of mellow today. We're going to read something from 1895, which, as we have experienced in the past, things that are written around that late 1800s, early 1900s period is very sleepy inducing, but still kind of interesting. So, bleh. 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 I need to get up closer to the screen. Bleh. That's the mood. The mood today is I have to shrink myself. Hold on. I have to shrink myself after every bit. So, for the time being, I think we're alone now. Just me and whoever's watching the VOD in the future. Hello, future people who are watching the VOD. No one's in the chat currently. That's okay. Ugh. Ay ay ay. Ay 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 ay. Just life stuff over the last couple of days. It's just life, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Hey. Anyway. Alright. I'm gonna zoom on up to my chair. I'm gonna hang out up here now. And I think we will probably just go ahead and jump right to it. Let's see. Do I have any other business to talk about before I get started? As always, donation button is down below, which is not required. I do this for fun. I think this is one of those books that's like past copyright. I think this is kind of in that public domain area. So I don't think I need to tell anybody's lawyers not to come after me. Not that that would work, even if that was the case. I did find out on the last stream, though, that if we do reach an affiliate status, then reading stuff that's like very clearly copyrighted material could get us into trouble. So I'm currently thinking of like other things that we could do on the stream in the future. Hoi hoi, Niley, welcome to the stream. But yeah, I've been kind of thinking about other things that could be done for the stream. There's an endless wealth of content out there that's like public domain reading. So I don't think that'll be a problem looking for stuff to be able to read on stream that's not going to have any copyright issues. I've thought about doing one of the read stream friends that rated us on the last session on Tuesday. I noticed that they do writing sprint streams where they just sort of set a time limit and they just like start writing and they just like go nuts with it. And I was like, oh, that might be fun to just like sit here with chat and be like, hey, let's write a story. Let's try to put something together within like a 2-hour time span and then see where we're at. I've started doing art commissions again, so I'm pondering the possibility of doing art streams. Maybe even like commission streams? Maybe? I don't know. I would need to, I'd want to try and make like a new backdrop scene for art streams so that, because whenever we've done art streams in the past, it's always been me just like airplaying to my tablet with like nothing cool going on screen. It's just me drawing. So I want to try and up the production value of that a little bit. But yeah, there's a variety of things. But I'm gonna be pondering on that over the weekend. For now, I just want to have a chill reading stream, and I picked this up from the bookstore a while back. I saw it really like tucked away into a corner, and I was like, oh, King in Yellow. That is interesting, because I always associate King in Yellow with like being a Lovecraftian mythos kind of thing, but it is from Robert W. Chambers, and I guess it kind of just got absorbed into the Lovecraftian pantheon of cosmic horror nonsense. By my understanding, this is actually a book of like short stories, but it's like a book of short stories that all have. Excuse me. I ate a bunch of I'm sorry. I ate a bunch of fried ravioli. It wasn't very good, but it's food, and I needed to eat. Yeah, King in Yellow. I think King in Yellow got sort of like absorbed into into Lovecraft stuff. Here, I have the wiki open. I'm sorry. Be prepared for a flash bomb. I'm sorry. I'm about to irradiate your eyes. But yeah, so like, I was looking at the Wikipedia page for King in Yellow for the book, and where is it? Here we go. Yeah, Cthulhu Mythos. H.P. Lovecraft read The King in Yellow in early 1927 and included passing references to various things and places from the book, such as the Lake of Hali and the Yellow Sign, The Whisper in the Darkness, one of his main Cthulhu Lovecraft stories. Lovecraft borrowed Chambers' method of only vaguely referring to supernatural events, entities, and places, thereby allowing his readers to imagine the horror for themselves. The play King in Yellow effectively became another piece of occult literature in the Cthulhu mythos alongside the Necronomicon and others. So, it's super interesting, because, like, this... I just saw the eye burns. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just flash bombed you with the Wikipedia saying. But this is super interesting, because, like, some of the stuff we were reading from the chilling Gothic horror tales that were, like, also late 1800s, those also felt like very pre-Lovecraft, but very like Lovecraftian inspiration, and it's super interesting. So like looking at this, I'm like, oh, that's actually fascinating. That this is all stuff that predates, you know, Lovecraft's style of writing and his methods and whatnot, and it's interesting to me how a lot of this stuff from before Lovecraft is really minus the racist English obsessed weirdo nonsensisms. I thought about doing another Lovecraft stream today, and I was gonna be like, let's check back in with our favorite old dead racist weirdo and see how long he can take to describe some other completely simple thing. Let's hear him talk about going to bed, and it takes like 2 pages in order to get there. He gets up for a glass of milk, and it takes like a novella in order to get to that point. But anyway, so yeah, I'm super interested to see where this goes. I don't really know an enormous lot about it. I was just gonna go ahead and get started, and we'll see what happens. We'll see where we go. The one thing I did read from some of my research on it is that there's parts of these stories that take place in like the future, but like from the late 1800s perspective. So like the first story, Lovecraft was paid by the word count. It shows. But yeah, it's still so anyway. But so it was written as like, oh, in the glorious future of 1920. So, from 1895's perspective of 1920. Hey Viv, welcome to the stream. I'm just about to get started. With our King in Yellow. You're not late. We haven't really even gotten started yet. I haven't done anything. I love the Yellow King. He's so yellow. Oh, I love looking at him. But yeah, so like I said, keep in mind 1895's vision of what 1920 was going to be like. But yeah, I don't know how far we'll get into this. If we do not finish it today, then yeah, this is the short stories that are, I guess, all have kind of like a connected thread. We'll see how much of it I can get through. I think we can probably at least get through like half, and then maybe if we really want to, if it turns out to be good, we can finish it on Tuesday. If not, then we'll see what happens. But yeah, these are the shorts. My favorite one's not even scary. I'm willing to bet, because like from what I was researching, the first story in the book has kind of like a macabre tone to it, but the rest of them are very kind of like romanticism, which I don't have an issue with. That sounds fine. I'm very curious to see what this is like. I'm very interested. So I think with all that said, there's a lot of romance and a lot of France. There's a lot of France. A lot of France. This is my France dance. France dance. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you all had to see that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started then. The first story that is in this collection is called The Repairer of Reputations. As always, let me know if any of the background ambient noise... You're welcome for my beautiful moves. Let me know if the background ambience is too loud. Let me know if I'm too loud. Let me know if there's any sound issues. Let's see. So this starts with what I'm going to assume is a little bit of French. Let's see what a couple of let's see what like a handful of vague sessions with Duolingo trying to learn French will do me here. Ne rien pas le faux, le follet, durer plus longtemps que le nôtre, voilà toute la différence. Toward the end of the year 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program, adopted during the last months of President Winthrop's administration. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knows how the tariff and labor questions were settled. The war with Germany incident on that country's seizure of the Samoan Islands had left no visible scars upon the Republic, and the temporary occupation of Norfolk by the invading army had been forgotten in the joy over the repeated naval victories, and the subsequent ridiculous plight of General von Gartenlaub's forces in the state of New Jersey. Oh boy. The Cuban and Hawaiian investments had paid 100%, and the territory of Samoa was well worth its cost as a coaling station. The country was in superb state of defense. Every coast city had been well supplied with land fortifications, the army under the parental eye of the general staff. Organized according to the Prussian system, had been increased to 300,000 men, with a territorial reserve of 1,000,000, and 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas. Navigable seas, leaving a steam reserve amply fitted to control home waters. The gentlemen from the West had at least been constrained to acknowledge that a college for the training of diplomats was as necessary as law schools are for the training of barristers. Consequently, we were no longer represented abroad by incompetent patriots. The nation was prosperous. Chicago, for a moment paralyzed after a second great fire, had risen from its ruins, white and imperial, and more beautiful than the white city which had been built for its plaything in 1893. Oh boy. Yup, we're reading stuff from 1895 today. Oh boy. Oh. Everywhere good architecture was replacing bad, and even in New York, a sudden craving for decency had swept away a great portion of the existing horrors. I'm going to take my glasses off for this. There we go. That's a little easier. Streets had been widened, properly paved and lightened. Trees had been planted, squares laid out, elevated structures demolished, and underground roads built to replace them. The new government buildings and barracks were fine bits of architecture, and the long system of stone quays which completely surrounded the island had been turned into parks which proved a godsend to the population. The subsiding of the state theater and the stage opera brought its own reward. The United States National Academy of Design was much like the European institutions of the same kind. Nobody envied the Secretary of Fine Arts, either his cabinet position or his portfolio. The Secretary of Forestry and Game Preservation had a much easier time thanks to the new system of National Mounted Police. We had profited well by the latest treaties with France and England. The exclusion of foreign-born... The exclusion of foreign-born Jews as a measure of self-preservation, the settlement of the new independent... Oh my god, how come we keep running across old-timey racism in these books? Probably because it's old-timey. The settlement of new independent Negro state of Sawnee, the checking of immigration, the new laws concerning naturalization, and the gradual centralization of power in the executive all contributed to national calm and prosperity. When the government solved the Indian problem... When they solved the Indian problem? Excuse me? When the government solved the Indian problem and squadrons of Indian cavalry scouts in native costume were substituted for the pitiable organizations tacked on the tail of the skeletonized regiments by a former Secretary of War, the nation drew a long sigh of relief. Oh, jeez. Oh, God. Oh, God damn it. Oh, don't worry, everybody. We're only gonna come across the old-timey racist shit with Lovecraft. This stuff doesn't have that in it. Nope, there it is. It's right there. Gull. Anyway. Oh, boy. Okay, anyway. When, after the colossal congress of religions, bigotry and intolerance were laid in their graves, and kindness and charity began to draw warring sects together, and then he thought the millennium had arrived, at least in the new world, after all which is the world. Oh my god. The book is... The story's straight up like, yeah, after we got rid of those undesirables, bigotry was wiped out. Thank God we're not racist anymore, says this author. I got bad news for you. That's so rough. He's just like, yeah, now that we've taken care of the Jews and Indians, now there's no more bigotry. Uh-huh. Okay. Oh, good lord. Alright, where were we? we're not even that far. We're less than like 5 minutes into this. We've already hit the all-time racism. But self-preservation is the first law, and the United States had to look on in helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, and Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy, while Russia, watching from the Caucasus, stooped and bound them one by one. In the city of New York, the summer of 1899 was signalized by the dismantling of the elevated railroads. The summer of 1900 will live in the memories of New York people for many a cycle. The Dodge statue was removed in that year, and the following winter began that agitation for the repeal of the laws prohibiting suicide, which bore its final fruit in the month of April 1920, when the first government lethal chamber was opened on Washington Square. Robert W. Chambers predicted the Futurama suicide booth. The best part is literally none of this has anything to do with the rest of the story. I honestly figured that was the case. We're gonna get all of this, like, exposition on how the world works, and then it's gonna have absolutely nothing to do with anything. I had walked down that day from Dr. Archer's house on Madison Avenue, where I had been as a mere formality. Ever since that fall from my horse 4 years before, I had been troubled at times with the pains in the back of my head and neck. But now for months they had been absent, and the doctor sent me away that day, saying there was nothing more to be cured in me. It was hardly worth his fee to be told that. I knew it myself. Still, I did not grudge him with money. What I minded was the mistake which he made at first, when they picked me up from the pavement where I lay unconscious, and somebody had mercifully sent a bullet through my horse's head. I was carried to Dr. Archer, and he, pronouncing my brain affected, placed me in his private asylum where I was obliged to endure treatment for insanity. At last he decided that I was well, and I, knowing that my mind had always been as sound as his, if not sounder, paid my tuition, as he jokingly called it, and left. I told him, smiling, that I would get even with him for his mistake, and he laughed heartily, and asked me to call once in a while. I did so, hoping for a chance to even up accounts, but he gave me none, and I told him I would wait. Ever since the fall from that horse, I've been having delusions of grandeur involving a post-racist society by being more racist. We gotta fight racism with more racism. It's like fighting fire with fire. We gotta fight racism with more racism. Trust me, it'll work. The fall from my The fall from my horse had fortunately left no evil results. On the contrary, it had changed my whole character for the better. From a lazy young man about town, I had become active, energetic, temperate, and above all else, ambitious. There was only one thing that troubled me. I laughed at my own uneasiness, and yet it troubled me. A horse fell on me, and now I'm a good person. During my convalescence, I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. He said he said the name. He said the name of the book. He said it. Ahem. I had bought and read for the... Hold on, I'm sliding off my chair. I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. I remember after finishing the first act that it occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book into the fireplace. The volume struck the barred gate and fell open on the hearth in the firelight. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words of the second act, I should have never finished it. But as I stooped to pick it up, my eyes became riveted to an open page. With a cry of terror, or perhaps it was of joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve, I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept, shaking, to my bedroom, where I read it, and reread it, and wept, and laughed, and trembled with a horror which at times assails me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, the black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon, when the twin suns sink into the lake of Hali, and my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. I pray God will curse the writer, as the writer has cursed the world with his beautiful, stupendous creation, terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth. A world which now trembles before the King in Yellow. When the French government seized the translated copies which had just arrived in Paris, London, of course became... Hold on a second, I need to take that line one more time. When the French government seized the translated copies which had just arrived in Paris, London, of course, became eager to read it. It is well known how the book spread like an infectious disease, from city to city, from continent to continent, barred out of here, confiscated there, denounced by press and pulpit, and censured even by the most advanced of literary anarchists. No definite principles had been violated in those wicked pages, no doctrine promulgated, no convictions outraged. It could not be judged by any known standard, yet although it was acknowledged that the supreme note of art had been struck in The King in Yellow, all felt that human nature could not bear the strain. nor thrive on words in which the essence of purest poison lurked. The very banality of the innocence of the first act only allowed allowed the blow to fall afterward with a more awful effect. It was, I remember, the 13th day of April, 1920, that the first government lethal chamber was established on the south side of Washington Square, between Wooster Street and South Fifth Avenue. The block, which had formerly consisted of a lot of shabbily old buildings used as cafes and restaurants for foreigners, had been acquired by the government in the winter of 1898. The French and Italian cafes and restaurants were torn down. The whole block was enclosed by a gilded iron railing and converted into a lovely garden with lawns, flowers, and fountains. In the center of the garden stood a small white building, severely classical in its architecture and surrounded by thickets of flowers. 6 Ionic columns supported the roof, and the single door was of bronze. A splendid marble group of the Fates stood before the door, the work of the young American sculptor, Boris Ivan, who had died in Paris when only 23 years old. The inauguration ceremonies were in progress as I crossed University Place and entered the square. I threaded my way through the silent throng of spectators, but was stopped at 4th Street by a cordon of police. I said, "Fuck the cops." I said, "Fuck them cops," and I hucked a rock at them. Anyway. A regiment of United States Lancers were drawn up in a hollow square round the lethal chamber. On a raised tribune facing Washington Park stood the governor of New York, and behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and Brooklyn, the inspector general of the police, the commandant of the state troops, Colonel Livingston, military aide to the President of the United States, General Blount, commanding at Governor's Island, Major General Hamilton, commanding the garrison of New York and Brooklyn, Admiral Buffby of the Buffby the Vampire Slayer, Admiral Buffby of the fleet in the North River, Surgeon General Lansford, the staff of the National Free Hospital, Senators Vise and Franklin of New York, and the Commissioner of Public Works. I often wondered if they had all explored each other's bodies. The tribune was surrounded by a squadron of hussars of the National Guard. The government was finishing his reply to the short speech of the Surgeon General. I heard him say, "The laws prohibiting suicide and providing punishment for any attempt at self-destruction have been repealed. Excuse me. The government has seen fit to acknowledge the right of a man to end an existence which may have become intolerable to him through physical suffering or mental despair. It is believed that the community will be benefited by the removal of such people from their midst. Since the passage of this law, the number of suicides in the United States has not increased. Now that the government has determined to establish a lethal chamber in every city, town, and village in the country, it remains to be seen whether or not the class of human creatures whose desponding ranks new victims of self-destruction fall daily will accept... I read that wrong. It remains to be seen whether or not that class of human creatures from whose desponding ranks new victims of self-destruction fall daily will accept the relief thus provided. He paused and turned to the white lethal chamber. The silence in the street was absolute. There, a painless death awaits him who can no longer bear the sorrows of life. If death is welcome, let him seek it there. Then quickly turning to the military aide of the president's household, he said, I declare this lethal chamber open! And again, facing the vast crowd, he cried in a clear voice, Citizens of New York and of the United States of America, through me, the government declares the lethal chamber to be open. So, okay. So, number one, we can fight racism with more racism. Number two, we can just shunt out all of the foreign cafes. We can just get rid of all them French and Italians and all that, and just plant a shitload of flowers. We'll just gentrify the whole neighborhood, and finally install suicide booths in the city. This is how you get a utopia, everybody. Joe Biden, are you listening? You can have this for free. No, wait, don't. Actually, no, wait, don't. Don't take it for free. Don't take it at all. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me whatsoever. You absolutely dementia-addled old man. Hold on, I have to shrink myself. Nobody take this advice. Nobody take anything. The solemn hush was broken by a sharp cry of command. The squadron of hussars filed after the governor's carriage. The lancers wheeled and formed along Fifth Avenue to wait for the commandant of the garrison, and the mounted police followed them. I left the crowd to gape and stare at the white marble death chamber, and crossing South Fifth Avenue, walked along the western side of that thoroughfare to Bleecker Street. Then I turned to the right and stopped before a dingy shop which bore the sign, Hochberg, Armorer. don't don't give him ideas. Yeah, exactly. If if your if your name is Joe Biden, close the stream immediately. You are banned. I'm I'm banning all politicians from the stream. If you're a politician, you are not allowed here. Get out. You're all nasty. You're all nasty people, and I hate you. I was calling politicians reptiles for a while, but then I learned that has like a really negative, like anti-Semitic connotation to like call anybody that. So I'm like, okay, let's stop using that. The best that I've come up with as a replacement is squarb. Squarb. I'm calling politicians squarbs in my head. If you're a politician, you're a squarb. It's about the energy. It's about the energy behind the word. Anyway, I glanced in the doorway and saw Hawberk busy in his little shop at the end of the hall. He looked up and, catching sight of me, cried in his deep, hearty voice, "Come in, Mr. Castaigne? Mr. Castaigne? Mr. Castagni? I'll call him Castaigne for now. Come in, Mr. Castaigne." Constance, his daughter, rose to meet me as I crossed the threshold, and held out her pretty hand. But I saw the blush of disappointment on her cheeks, and knew that it was another Castaigne she had expected, my cousin Louis. I had smiled at her confusion and complimented her on the banner she was embroidering from the colored plate. Old Hawberk sat riveting the worn greaves of some ancient suit of armor, and the ting, the ting of his little hammer sounded pleasant in the quaint shop. His little hammer, the little ting of his little baby hammer, his little baby hammer, the good ting, little baby hammer. Presently, he dropped his hammer and fussed about for a moment with a tiny wrench. Oh, he's got a little tiny wrench to go with his tiny hammer. The soft clash of the mail sent a thrill of pleasure through me. I loved to hear the music of steel brushing against steel, the mellow shock of the mallet on thigh pieces, and the jingle of chain armor. That was the only reason I went to see Hawberk. He was never interested in me personally, nor did Constance, except for the fact of her being in love with Louis. This did not occupy my attention, and sometimes even kept me awake at night. But I knew in my heart that all would come right, and that I should arrange their future as I expected to arrange that of my kind doctor, John Archer. However, I should never have troubled myself about visiting them just then, had it not been, as I say, that the music of the twinkling hammer had for me this strong fascination. I would sit for hours listening, and when a stray sunbeam struck the inlaid steel, the sensation it gave me was almost too keen to ignore. My eyes would become fixed, dilating with pleasure that stretched every nerve almost to breaking, until some movement of the old armorer cut off the ray of sunlight. Then, still thrilling secretly, I leaned back and listened again to the sound of the polishing rag, swish, swish, rubbing rust from the rivets. Constance worked with the embroidery over her knees, now and then pausing to examine more closely the pattern in the colored plate from the Metropolitan Museum. "Who is this for?" I asked. Hawberk explained that in addition to the treasures of armor in the Metropolitan Museum, of which he had been appointed armorer, he also had charge of several collections belonging to rich amateurs. This was the missing greave of a famous suit which a client of his had traced to a little shop in Paris on the Croix d'Orsay. He, Hobart, had negotiated for had negotiated for and secured the Grieve, and now the suit was complete. He laid down his hammer and read me the story of the suit, traced since 1450, from owner to owner until it was acquired by a Thomas Sainsbury. When his superb collection was sold, this client of Hobart's bought the suit, and since then the search for the missing Grieve had been pushed until it was, almost by accident, located in Paris. Did you continue to search so persistently without any certainty of the Grieve's still being in existence? I demanded. Of course, he replied coolly. Then for the first time, I took a personal interest in Hobart. It was worth something to you, I ventured. No, he replied, laughing. My pleasure in finding it was my reward. Have you no ambition to be rich? I asked, smiling. My one ambition is to be the best armorer in the world, he answered gravely. Constance asked me if I had seen the ceremonies at the Lethal Chamber. She herself had noticed cavalry passing up Broadway that morning, and had wished to see the inauguration. But her father wanted the banner finished, and she had stayed at his request. Papa! Papa! I want to go see the suicide chamber, please. May I take a tuppence from work, so that I may go and witness the suicide chamber? No, my daughter, finish the banner. The suicide chamber isn't going anywhere. It'll still be there tomorrow. we have suicide chamber at home. Suicide chamber at home. Did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne, there? She asked, with the slightest tremor of her soft eyelashes. No, I replied carelessly. Lewis's regiment is maneuvering out of Westchester County. I rose and picked up my hat and cane. Are you going upstairs to see the lunatic again? Laughed old Hobart. If Hobart knew how I loathed that word lunatic, he would never use it in my presence. It rouses certain feelings within me which I do not care to explain. However, I answered him quietly. I think I shall drop in and see Mr. Wilde for a moment or two. Poor fellow, said Constance, with a shake of her head. It must be hard to live alone year after year, poor, crippled, and almost demented. It's very good of you, Mr. Castaigne, to visit him so often as you do. The book is already predicting Lovecraft. Poor, crippled, and almost almost demented. Hello, Books, Brews, and Booze. You were one of the Raider friends from Tuesday. Lovely to see you again. And yes, today we are reading The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. I think he is vicious, observed Hobart, beginning again with his hammer. I listened to the golden tinkle on the Grieve plates, which he had finished. When he had finished, I replied, "No, he is not vicious, nor is he in the least demented. His mind is a wonder chamber from which he can extract treasures that you and I would give years of our life to acquire." Hobart laughed. I continued a little impatiently. He knows history as no one else could know it. Nothing, however trivial, escapes his search, and his memory is so absolute, so precise in details, that were it known in New York that such a man existed, the people could not honor him enough. Ugh, nonsense, muttered Hobart, searching on the floor for a fallen rivet. Is it nonsense, I asked, managing to suppress what I felt. Is it nonsense when he says that the Tassets and the Cuissards of the enameled suit of armor commonly known as the Princes Emblazoned can be found among a mass of rusty theatrical properties, broken stoves, and rag-pickers' refuse in a garret in Pell Street? Hobart's hammer fell to the ground, but he picked it up and asked with a great deal of calm how I knew that the Tassets and left Cuissard were missing from the Princes Emblazoned. I did not know until Mr. Wilde mentioned it to me the other day. He said they were in the garret of 998 Pell Street. Nonsense, he cried, but I noticed his hand trembling under his leathered apron. Is this nonsense too? I asked pleasantly. Is it nonsense when Mr. Wilde continually speaks of you as the Marquis of Avonshire and of Miss Constance I did not finish, for Constance had started to her feet with terror written in every feature. Hopperk looked at me slowly and smoothed his leather apron. This is impossible, he observed. Mr. Wilde may know a great many things. About armor, for instance, and the Prince's Emblazoned, I interposed, smiling. Yes, he continued, slowly. About armor, also, may be, but he is wrong in regard to the Marquis of Avonshire, who, as you know, killed his wife's traducer years ago, and went to Australia, where he did not long survive his wife. Mr. Wilde is wrong, murmured Constance. Her lips were blanched, but her voice was sweet and calm. Let us agree, if you please, that in this one circumstance, Mr. Wilde is wrong, I said. I climbed the 3 dilapidated flights of stairs which I had so often climbed before, and knocked at a small door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Wilde opened the door, and I walked in. When he had double-locked the door and pushed a heavy chest against it, he came and sat down beside me, peering up into my face with his little light-colored eyes. Half a dozen new scratches covered his nose and cheeks, and the silver wires which supported his artificial ears had become displaced. I thought I had never seen him so hideously fascinating. He had no ears. The artificial ones, which now stood out at an angle from the fine wire, were his one weakness. They were made of wax and painted a shell pink, but the rest of his face was yellow. He might better have reveled in the luxury of some artificial fingers for his left hand, which was absolutely fingerless, but it seemed to cause him no inconvenience, as he was satisfied with his wax ears. He was very small, scarcely higher than a child of 10, but his arms were magnificently developed, and his thighs as thick as any athlete's. Yo, that Mr. Wilde, he got them thighs. He's got them thick like, He got them like, he's got them thick thighs. Mr. Wilde, present them thick-ass thighs. Damn, boy, that's a thick-ass boy. wait, hold on. Hold on a minute, can I find it? Hold on. Can I find just like the original real quick? Here we go.
Damn, boy, he's thick. Boy, that's a thick
Yes, boy.
Damn.
Mr. Castine walking in and finding Mr. Wilde. Damn, boy, that's a thick-ass boy. That's a thick-ass boy. Dunny, are you okay? Literally never. There's never once have I ever been okay. Sorry, I'm laughing maniacally at my own stupid joke. Ugh. Still, the most remarkable thing about Mr. Wilde was that a man of his marvelous intelligence and knowledge should have such a head. Excuse me. Should have such a head. It was flat and pointed, like the heads of many of those unfortunate whom people imprison in asylums for the weak-minded. Many called him insane, but I knew him to be as sane as I was. No sense in starting to be okay now. Yeah, why would I start being okay now? I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania he had for keeping I can't read. I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania he had for keeping that cat and teasing her until she flew at his face like a demon was certainly eccentric. I never could understand why he kept the creature, nor what pleasure he found in shutting himself up in his room with this surly, vicious beast. I remembered once glancing up from a manuscript I was studying by the light of some tallow dips, and seeing Mr. Wilde squatting motionless on his high chair, his eyes fairly blazing with excitement, while the cat, which had risen from her place before the stove, came creeping across the floor right at him. Before I could move, she flattened her belly to the ground, crouched, trembled, and sprang to his face. Howling and foaming, they rolled over and over on the floor, scratching and clawing, until the cat screamed and fled into the cabinet. And while Mr. Wilde turned over on his back, his limbs contracting and curling up like the legs of a dying spider. He was eccentric. Mr. Wilde had climbed into his high chair, and after studying my face, picked up a dog's-eared ledger and opened it. Henry B. Matthews, he read. Bookkeeper with Wysott and Company. Dealers in church ornaments. Called April 3rd. Reputation demanded on a racetrack, known as a welcher. Reputation to be repaired by August 1st. Retainer, $5. He returned the page and ran his fingerless knuckles down to the closely written columns. P. Green Dusenberry, Minister of the Gospel, Fair Beach, New Jersey. Reputation damaged in the Bowery. To be repaired as soon as possible. Retainer, 100. He coughed and added, called April 6th. Then you are not in need of money, Mr. Wilde, I inquired. Listen, he coughed again. Mrs. C. Hamilton, Chester, of Chester Park, New York City. Called April 7th. Reputation damaged at Dieppe, Bronx. To be repaired by October 1st. Retainer, 500. Note, C. Hamilton Chester, Captain USS Avalanche, ordered home from South Sea Squadron, October 1st. Well, I said, the profession of a repairer of reputations is lucrative. His colorless eyes sought mine. I only wanted to demonstrate that I was correct. You said it was impossible to succeed as a repairer of reputations. That even if I did succeed in certain cases, it would cost me more than I would gain by it. Today, I have 500 men in my employ who are poorly paid, but who pursue the work with an enthusiasm which possibly may be born of fear. These men enter every shade and grade of society. Some even are pillars of the most exclusive social temples. Others are the prop and pride of the financial world. Still, others hold undisputed sway among the fancy and the talent. I choose them at my leisure from those who reply to my advertisements. It is easy enough. They are all cowards. I could treble the number in 20 days if I wished. So you see, those who have their keeping their reputations of their fellow citizens, I have in my pay. They may turn on you, I suggested. He rubbed his thumb over his cropped ears and adjusted the wax substitutes. I think not, he murmured thoughtfully. I seldom have to apply the whip, and then only once. Besides, they like their wages. How do you apply the whip? I demanded. His face for a moment was awful to look upon. His eyes dwindled to a pair of green sparks. I invite them to come and have a little chat with me, he said in a soft voice. A knock at the door interrupted him, and his face resumed its amiable expression. Who is it? He inquired. Mr. Stelet. Mr. Stelet? Stelet? Mr. Stelet. Mr. Stelet. Hello, I am Mr. Stelet. Sorry. Mr. Stelet, was the answer. Come tomorrow, replied Mr. Wilde. Impossible, began the other, but was silenced by a sort of bark from Mr. Wilde. Like he just yelps at him. Come tomorrow, he repeated. We heard somebody move away from the door and turn the corner by the stairway. Who is that? I asked. Arnold Stelet, owner and editor-in-chief of the great New York Daily. He drummed on the ledger with his fingerless hand, adding, I pay him very badly, but he thinks it's a good bargain. Arnold Stelet, I repeated, amazed. Yes, said Mr. Wilde with a self-satisfied cough. The cat, which had entered the room as he spoke, hesitated, looked up at him and snarled. He climbed down from the chair and, squatting on the floor, took the creature into his arms and caressed her. The cat ceased snarling and presently began a loud purring, which seemed to increase in timbre as he stroked her. Where are the notes? I asked. He pointed to a table, and for the 100th time, I picked up the bundle of manuscript entitled The Imperial Dynasty of America. One by one, I studied the well-worn pages, worn only by my own handling, and although I knew all by heart, from the beginning, when from Carcosa, the Hyades, Hastur, and Aldebaran, to Castaigne, Louis de Calvados, born December 19th, 1877. I read it with an eager, rapt attention, pausing to repeat parts of it aloud, and dwelling especially on Hildred de Calvados, only son of Hildred Castaigne and Edith Landes Castaigne, first in succession of etc., etc. Imperial Dynasty of America. Is this an alt history thing? Yes. I think you might have missed when I was bringing it up earlier that this stories is taking place from like this author's perspective of 1920, but from the year like 1895. So this is so yeah, it's like alt history, though it's weird to think that because it's like it's not alt history written by someone going like, "Oh, what if this happened?" This is like future science fiction written by someone from like late 1800s. Where was I? When I finished, Mr. Wilde nodded and coughed. Speaking of your legitimate ambition, he said, how do Constance and Lewis get along? She loves him, I replied simply. The cat on his knee suddenly turned and struck at his eyes, and he flung her off and climbed onto the chair opposite to me. And Dr. Archer, but that's a matter you can settle any time you wish, he added. Yes, I replied, Dr. Archer can wait, but it is time I saw my cousin Lewis. It is time, he repeated. I mean, like, let's see. I mean, like, a dynasty usually needs more than 30 years, which is why I asked. Good question. Yeah, I don't know. It didn't really. There was like a history exposition dump at the very beginning. So I don't know. I was like I read it all, but like I didn't retain any of it. It might just be a real. Maybe it's like a secretive underground thing or like a fancy thing. Maybe if we keep going, we'll find out. And I don't mean that dismissively. I mean like if we keep reading, maybe we'll figure out what the hell that means. It is time, he repeated. Then he took another ledger from the table and ran over the leaves rapidly. It's not historical, even in context. Oh, okay. We are now in communication with 10,000 men, he muttered. We can count on 100,000 within the first 28 hours, and in the 48 hours the state will rise en masse. The country follows the state, and the portion that will not, I mean California and the Northwest, might better never have been inhabited. I shall not send them the yellow sign. The blood rushed to my head, but I only answered, a new broom sweeps clean. The ambition of Caesar and of Napoleon pales before that which could not rest until it had seized the minds of men and controlled even their unborn thoughts, said Mr. Wilde. You are speaking of the king in yellow, I groaned with a shudder. He is a king whom emperors have served. I am content to serve him, I replied. I am content to serve him, I replied. Mr. Wilde sat rubbing at his ears with his crippled hand. Perhaps Constance does not love him, he suggested. I started to reply, but a sudden burst of military music from the street below drowned my voice. The 20th Dragoon Regiment, formerly in garrison at Mount St. Vincent, was returning from the maneuvers in the Westchester County to its new barracks on East Washington Square. It was my cousin's regiment. They were a fine lot of fellows in their pale blue, tight-fitting jackets, jaunty busbies, and white riding breeches with a double yellow stripe, into which their limbs seemed molded. Every other squadron was armed with lances, from metal points of which fluttered yellow and white pennons. The band passed, playing the regimental march. Then came the colonel and staff, the horses crowding and trampling, while their heads bobbed in unison and the pennons fluttered from their lance points. The troopers who rode with the beautiful English seat looked down as berries from their bloodless campaign among the farms of Westchester, and the music of their sabers against the stirrups and the jingle of spurs and carbines was delightful to me. I saw Lewis riding with the squadron. He was as handsome as an officer as I had ever seen. Mr. Wilde, who had mounted a chair by the window, saw him too, but said nothing. Lewis turned and looked straight at Hawberk's shop as he passed. I could see the flush on his brown cheeks. I think Constance must have been in the window. When the last troopers have clattered by, and the last pennons vanished into the South Fifth Avenue, Mr. Wilde clambered out of his chair and dragged the chest away from the door. Yes, he said, it is time you saw your cousin Lewis. He unlocked the door, and I picked up my hat and stick and stepped into the corridor. The stairs were dark. Groping about, I set my foot on something soft, which snarled and spat, and I aimed a murderous blow at the cat, but my cane shivered it to splinters against the balustrade, and the beast scurried back into Mr. Wilde's room. Passing Hawberk's door again, I saw him still at work on the armor, but I did not stop, and stepping out into Bleecker Street, I followed it to Worcester. Worcester. I followed it to Worcester. I'm getting woosted. I followed it to Worcester, skirted the grounds of the lethal chamber, and crossing Washington Park went straight to my rooms in the Benedict. Here, I lunched comfortably, read the Herald and the Meteor, and finally went to the steel safe in my bedroom and set the time combination. The 3 3/4 minutes which it is necessary to wait while the time lock is opening are to me golden moments. From the instant I set the combination to the moment when I grasp the knobs and swing back the solid steel doors, I live in an ecstasy of expectation. Those moments must be like moments passed in paradise. I know what I am to find at the end of the time limit. I know what the massive safe holds secure for me alone, and the exquisite pleasure of waiting is hardly enhanced when the safe opens and I lift, from its velvet crown and diadem of purest gold blazing with diamonds. I do this every day, and yet the joy of waiting and at last touching again the diadem only seems to increase as the days pass. It is a diadem fit for a king among kings, an emperor among emperors. The king in yellow might scorn it, but it shall be worn by his royal servant. I'm gonna look up what a diadem is. What the hell's a diadem? I can't see diadem. What is a diadem? The authority or dignity symbolized by a diadem, a jeweled crown or headband worn as a symbol of sovereignty. What's it look like? Ah, okay. It's one of these things. It's like a fancy tiara. Okay, cool. We always learn stuff when we read old books. I come across words I have never seen before. I held it in my arms until the alarm in the safe rang harshly, and then tenderly, proudly, I replaced it and shut the steel doors. I walked slowly back to my study, which faces Washington Square, and leaned on the windowsill. The afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds and tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of the memorial church, sometimes alighting on the purple tile roof, sometimes wheeling downward toward the lotos fountain in front of the marble arch. The gardeners were busy with the flower beds around the fountain, and the freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. A lawnmower, drawn by a fat white horse, clinked across the green sward, and watering cans poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Rude to call that horse fat. You didn't need to say that. Hello, Supernatural Writer. Welcome in. Thank you for joining. We're reading The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers, which so far has been weird alt history, strange old-timey racism, and I think cat abuse. Long day of words indeed. I was actually, you do, I believe that when I was going through some of your VODs and stuff, and I saw that you do, like, writing sprints, and I was like, oh, I should try that sometime. That sounds like fun. I'm pondering doing that for a stream at some point. To just, like, sit here and just, like, write something, and then, like, have chat here and be like, let's make a story together. And by the end, I'll hate it, because that's what happens whenever I try to write anything. Anyway, hopping back to it. The The afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds and tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of the memorial church, sometimes alighting on the purple-tiled roof, sometimes wheeling downwards towards the lotos fountain in front of the marble arch. The gardeners were busy with the flower beds around the fountain, and a freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. A lawnmower. Oh, right, I got up to Fat Horse. I was trying to figure out where I left off, and I just remembered. A lawnmower drawn by a fat white horse clinked across the green sward, and watering cans poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Around the statue of Peter Stuyvesant, which in 1897 had replaced the monstrosity supposed to represent Garibaldi, children played in the spring sunshine, and nurse girls wheeled elaborate baby carriages with a reckless disregard for the pasty-faced occupants, who could probably be explained by the presence of half a dozen trim dragoon troopers languidly lolling on the benches. Through the trees, the Washington Memorial Arch glistened like silver in the sunshine, and beyond, on the eastern extremity of the square, the gray stone barracks of the dragoons and the white granite artillery stables were alive with color and motion. I looked at the lethal chamber on the corner of the square opposite. A few curious people still lingered about the gilded iron railing, but inside the grounds the path was deserted. I watched the fountains ripple and sparkle. The sparrows had already found this new bathing nook, and the basins were covered with the dusty feathered little things. Two or three white peacocks picked their way across the lawns, and a drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one of the fates. It seemed to be a part of the sculptured stone. So it's like historical fan fiction. Yeah, it's something like that. This was written in 1895, but it's kind of like the author. Yeah, at the time it was science fiction. This is like the author was sort of like making up like what the world would be like in 1920. So it's 1895's vision of what 1920 would be like, which in Q, which for some this is not like been important to the story whatsoever, but like a big part they keep talking about like suicide booths. Basically they're like, we've opened the suicide dormitoriums. Yeah, it's funny how some things he got almost right. Yeah, he mentioned something about like a war with Germany or something, like predicted 20 years like before World War One ever happened. It's a dystopia, but the date's already passed then, something like that. Yeah, it is odd. The title King in Yellow, I believe, refers to like like both a play and like an entity that is in this universe. And that's what's kind of like been mentioning, but like, yeah, this is sort of like the backdrop. It's sort of like this a war with Germany and also the Soviet Union. Yeah, it's super weird that how he like kind of half predicted things. Not sure if it's supposed to be dystopic or utopic, considering the narrator. Yeah, it's a very what's the term? Unreliable narrator, I think, is the term. Yeah, because this is I believe that's the term for it. So like, we're just going off of what this guy says is happening in the world. The narrator's very reliable. He said so himself. He taught us that you can beat racism with more racism. He taught us that if you're enough of a bigot, bigotry will be wiped out. That's how it works. He straight up was like, if we now that we got rid of those undesirables, now bigotry doesn't exist. What a masterful political mind he has. This is your reminder that if you are a politician, I want you to leave my street right now. Yeah, I don't want you getting ideas. Anyway. Right, we were talking about birds. As I was turning carelessly away, a slight commotion in a group of curious loiterers around the gates attracted my attention. A young man had entered and was advancing with nervous strides along the graveled path which leads to the bronze doors of the lethal chamber. He paused a moment before the fates, and as he raised his head to those three mysterious faces, the pigeon rose from its sculpted perch, circled about for a moment, and wheeled to the east. The young man pressed his hand to his face, and then, with an undefinable gesture, sprang up the marble steps. The bronze doors closed behind him, and half an hour later, the loiterers were slouched away, and the frightened pigeon returned to its perch in the arms of fate. I put on my hat and went out to the park for a little walk before dinner. I just watched a man die. I'm gonna get my hat and I'm gonna go to dinner. I watched a man walk into the "you get dead" box. Now I'm hungry. Now I'm going to Whataburger. I'm gonna go get me a sandwich. Watching a man die sure works up an appetite. I put on my hat and went out to the park for a little walk before dinner. As I crossed the central driveway, a group of officers passed, and one of them called out, "Hello, Hildred," and came back to shake hands with me. It was my cousin Lewis, who stood smiling and tapping his spurred heels with his riding whip. "Just back from Westchester," he said. Been doing the bucolic milk. Been doing the bucolic milk and curds, you know. Bit. What? Been doing the bubonic milk and curds, you know. Dairy maids and sunbonnets, who say how and I don't think when you tell them they are pretty. I'm nearly dead for a square meal at Del Moncion's. What's the news? There is none, I replied pleasantly. I saw your regiment coming in this morning. Did you? I didn't see you. Where were you? In Mr. Wilde's window. Oh, hell, he began impatiently. That man is stark mad. I don't understand why you... He saw how annoyed I felt by his outburst, and begged my pardon. Yeah, wow, same. Uh, okay. Really, old chap, he said, I don't mean to run down a man you like, but for the life of me, I can't see what the deuce you find in common with Mr. Wilde. He's not well bred, to put it generously. He is hideously deformed. His head is the head of a criminally insane person. You know yourself he's been in an asylum. So have I interrupted calmly. But god damn it all, I just love that man. I just love him so much, you'll never understand our love. You'll never understand what I see in him, what I see in his eyes. Anyway. Lewis looked startled and confused for a moment, but recovered and slapped me heartily on the shoulder. You were completely cured, he began, but I stopped him again. I suppose you mean that I was simply acknowledged never to have been insane. Of course that's what I mean, he laughed. Context for people that are new joining, the main character was accidentally put in an insane asylum for a little while, and then when he was let out, like, the doctor kind of just sort of paid him off and said, like, haha, here you go. Here's to pay you for accidentally leaving you in an insane asylum when you weren't supposed to be there. Of course that's what I meant, he laughed. I disliked his laugh because I knew it was forced, but I nodded gaily and asked him where he was going. Lewis looked after his brother officers, who had now almost reached Broadway. We had intended to sample a Brunswick cocktail, but to tell you the truth, I was anxious for an excuse to go and see Hobart instead. Come along, I'll make you my excuse. We found old Hobart neatly attired in a fresh spring suit, standing at the door of his shop and sniffing the air. I had just decided to take Constance for a little stroll before dinner, he replied, to the impetuous volley of questions from Lewis. We thought of walking on the park terrace along the North River. At the moment, Constance appeared to grow pale and rosy by turns as Lewis bent over her small gloved fingers. I tried to excuse myself, alleging an engagement uptown, but Lewis and Constance would not listen, and I saw I was expected to remain and engage old Hawberk's attention. After all, it would be just as well if I kept my eye on Lewis, I thought, and when they hailed a Spring Street horse car, I got in after them and took my seat beside the armorer. Accidentally. To oopsie. The beautiful line of parks and granite terraces overlooking the wharves along the North River, which were built in 1910 and finished in the autumn of 1917, had become one of the most popular promenades in the metropolis. They had extended from the Battery to the I-90th Street, 190th Street. I'm gonna call it 90th Street. It's 90th Street. I'm naming it that. I-90th Street? Oh, maybe it is I-90th Street, like a highway. Battery to I-90th Street, overlooking the noble river and affording a fine view of the Jersey Shore and the Highlands opposite. Cafes and restaurants were scattered here and there among the trees. A twice-a-week military bands from the garrison played in the kiosks on the parapets. We saw down in the sunshine on the bench. We sat down. I can't read. I'm sorry. I confess to you all, I can't read. I've been faking it this entire time. I just memorized it all. I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'm leaving now. I can't read. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Anyway. One of these days I'll really do it. I'll really leave. We sat down in the sunshine on the beach at the foot of the equestrian statue of General Sheridan. Constance tipped her sunshade to shield her eyes, and she and Lewis began a murmuring conversation which was impossible to catch. Old Hawberk, leaning on his ivory-headed cane, lighted an excellent cigar, the mate to which I politely refused, and smiled at vacancy. The sun hung low above the Staten Island woods, and the bay was dyed with golden hues reflected from sun-warmed sails of the shipping in the harbor. Brigs, schooners, yachts, clumsy ferry boats, the decks swarming with people, railroad transports carrying lines of brown, blue, and white freight cars, stately sound steamers, déclassé tramp steamers, coasters, dredgers, scows, everywhere pervading the entire bay. Everywhere pervading the entire bay. Hold on, I keep screwing up my sentence. And everywhere pervading the entire bay, impudent little tugs puffing and whistling officiously. These were the craft which churned the sunlit waters as far as the eye could reach. In calm contrast to the hurry of a sailing vessel and a steamer, a silent fleet of white warships lay motionless in midstream. Constance's merry laugh aroused me from my reverie. "What are you staring at?" she inquired. "Nothing. The fleet," I smiled. Then Lewis told us what the vessels were, pointing out each by its relative position to the old red fort on Governor's Island. "The little cigar-shaped thing is a torpedo boat," he explained. "There are 4 more laying close together. They are the Tarpon, the Falcon, the Sea Fox, and the Octopus." He starts reading them off, and they're all like Metal Gear names. This one, they are in order: Solid Snake, Big Boss, Revolver Ocelot. That's the only Metal Gear characters that I know. No, the Otacon. I feel like there's more that would be more fitting, but I just don't remember. The gunboats just above them are the Princeton, the Champlain, the Stillwater, and the Eyre. Next to them lie the cruisers Farragut and Los Angeles, and above them the battleships California and Dakota, and the Washington, which is the flagship. Those 2 squatty-looking chunks of metal, which are anchored there off Castle William, are the double-turreted monitors, terrible and magnificent. Behind them lies the ram Osceola. Hey. Constance looked at him with a deep approval in her beautiful eyes. "What loads of things you know for a soldier," she said, and we all joined in the laugh which followed. "You're so smart. You know so much military. You know so many names of boats. You're tall. What are you doing later?" Presently Lewis rose with a nod to us and offered his arm to Constance, and they strolled away along the river wall. Hawberk watched them for a moment and then turned to me. "Mr. Wilde was right," he said. I have found the missing tassets and left cuissard of the Princes Emblazoned in a vile old junk garret in Pell Street. 998? I inquired with a smile. Yes. Mr. Wilde is a very intelligent man, I observed. I want to give him credit of this most important discovery, continued Hawberk, and I intend it shall be known that he is entitled to the fame of it. He won't thank you for that, I answered sharply. Please say nothing about it. Do you know what it's worth? Said Hawberk. No. $50, perhaps. It is valued at $500, but the owner of the Princes Emblazoned will give $2,000 to the person who completes his suit. That reward also belongs to Mr. Wilde. He doesn't want it. He refuses it, I answered angrily. What do you know about Mr. Wilde? He doesn't need the money. He is rich, or will be, richer than any living man except myself. What will we care for money then? What will we care, he and I, when we're married and we move to the countryside to be together? When what? Demanded Hawberk, astonished. You will see, I replied, on my guard again. Welcome in, machine elves. No worries. It is, none of this is going to make any damn sense to you, though. I will say that. If I had to give a okay. Crash course for you, okay? This is 1920, but it's written by a guy in 1895. So this is what he was like, future. It's gonna have some stuff. Like suicide booths. And no racism because all the racists out-racists all the other racists. So there's just no more racism because the racists were more racist than other racists. Anyway, that's basically what it is. They fought racism. But yeah, it's weird. It's alt history, but written as science fiction in 1895. Days of Future Past. You will see, I replied, on my guard again. He looked at me narrowly, much as Dr. Archer used to, and I knew he thought I was mentally unsound. Excuse me. Perhaps it was fortunate for him that he did not use the word lunatic just then. No, I replied to his unspoken thought. I am not mentally weak. My mind is as healthy as Mr. Wilde's. I do not care to explain just yet what I have on hand, but it is an investment which will pay more than mere gold, silver, or precious stones. It will secure the happiness and prosperity of a continent, yes, a hemisphere. Oh, said Hawberk. And eventually, I continued more quietly, it will secure the happiness of the whole world. And incidentally, your own happiness and prosperity, as well as Mr. Wilde's. Exactly, I smiled. But I could have throttled him for taking that tone. He looked at me in silence for a while, and then said very gently, Why don't you give up your books and studies, Mr. Castine, and take a tramp among the mountains somewhere or other? You used to be fond of fishing. Take a cast or two at the trout and the Ranglaise. I don't care for fishing anymore, I answered, without a shade of annoyance in my voice. I don't care for fishing anymore. I don't want to fish. I don't care to trick fish anymore. You used to be fond of everything, he continued. Athletics, yachting, shooting, riding, ice cream, scooping, pooping, farting. Anyway. I have never cared to ride since my fall, I said quietly. Ah, yes, your fall, he repeated, looking away from me. I thought this nonsense had gone far enough, so I brought the conversation back to Mr. Wilde. But he was scanning my face again in a manner highly offensive to me. He's like... It's like scanning his face, but he's like this close. He's like, I'm scanning you. Now scanning. You are being scanned. You are now being scanned. Let me see them. I am scanning your cheeks. Your cheeks are now being scanned. Now scanning your cheeks. Mr. Wilde, he repeated. Do you know what he did this afternoon? He came downstairs and nailed a sign over the hall door next to mine. It read, Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputations, third bell. What have I arrived back to? You arrived to a man being scanned offensively. You scanned me in a way that I found offensive. Do you know what a repairer of reputations can be? I do, I replied, suppressing the rage within. Oh, he started again. Lewis and Constance came strolling by and stopped to ask if we would join them. Hobart looked at his watch. At the same moment, a puff of smoke shot from the Casamades? 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 What the hell's Casamade? Oh, I didn't have my book yet. Whatever. We're going on a field trip anyway. I gotta look up what a Casamade is. Field trip. We're looking up Casamades. Casamades? Casamades. What the hell's a Casamade? Casemates. A fortified gun emplacement or armored structure from which guns are fired in fortification, warship, or armored fighting vehicle. Casemates! Hey! Okay. Once again, we learned a new word. A puff of smoke shot from the Casamades of Castle William, and the boom of the sunset gun rolled across the water and was re-echoed from the highlands opposite. The flag came running down from the flagpole. The bugles sounded on the white decks of the warships, and the first electric lights sparkled out from the Jersey shore. As I turned to the city with Hobart, I heard Constance murmur something to Lewis which I did not understand, but Lewis whispered, "My darling," in reply. And again, walking ahead with Hobart through the square, I heard a murmur of "sweetheart" and "my own Constance," and I knew the time had nearly arrived when I should speak of important matters with my cousin Lewis. I didn't have my book out. I forgot to take out my book. I'm just staring at y'all as I read words. I'm temporarily reading off a teleprompter. Huh. One morning early May, I stood before the steel safe in my bedroom, trying on the golden jeweled crown. The diamonds flashed fire as I turned to the mirror, and the heavy beaten gold burned like a halo about my head. I remembered Camilla's agonized scream and the awful words echoing through the dim streets of Carcosa. They were the last lines in the first act, and I dared not think of what followed. Dared not, even in the spring sunshine there in my own room, surrounded with familiar objects, reassured by the bustle from the street, and the voices of servants in the hallways outside, for those poisoned words had dropped slowly into my heart, as death sweat drops upon a bedsheet, and it's... I have to take that one more time, I'm sorry. For those poisoned words had dropped slowly into my heart, as death sweat drops upon a bedsheet and is as death sweats drop upon a bedsheet and is absorbed. 1895. 1895. Sometimes sentences are structured really weird. Trembling, I put the diadem from my head and wiped my forehead. But I thought of Hastur and of my own rightful ambition, and I remembered Mr. Wilde as I had left him, his face all torn and bloody from the claws of that devil's creature. And what he said, what he said. The alarm bell in the safe began to whir harshly, and I knew my time was up. But I would not heed it, and replacing the flashing circlet upon my head, I turned defiantly to the mirror. I stood for a long time, absorbed in the changing expression of my own eyes. The mirror reflected a face which was like my own, but whiter, and so thin that I hardly recognized it. And all the time I kept repeating between my clenched teeth, "The day has come, the day has come," while the alarm in the safe whirred and clamored, and the diamonds sparkled and flamed above my brow. I heard a door open, but did not heed it. It was only when I saw two faces in the mirror. It was only when another face rose above my shoulder, and two other eyes met mine. I wheeled like a flash and seized a long knife from my dressing table, and my cousin sprang back, very pale, crying, "Hildred, for God's sake!" Then, as my hand fell, he said, "It is I, Lewis, don't you know me?" I stood silent. I could not have spoken for my life. He walked up to me and took the knife from my hand. "What is all of this?" he inquired in a gentle voice. "Are you ill?" "No," I replied, but I doubt if he heard me. "Come, come, old fellow," he cried. Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. Are you going to a masquerade? What's all this theatrical tinsel, anyway?" I was glad he thought the crown was made of brass in haste, yet I didn't like him any the better for thinking so. I let him take it from my hand, knowing it was best to humor him. He tossed the splendid diadem in the air, catching it, and turned to me, smiling. "It's dear at 50 cents, he said. "What's it for?" I did not answer, but took the circlet from his hands, placing it in the safe, and shut the massive steel door. The alarm ceased its infernal din at once. He watched me curiously, but did not seem to notice the sudden ceasing of the alarm. He did, however, speak of the safe as a biscuit box. Fearing lest he might examine the combination, I led the way into my study. Lewis threw himself upon the sofa and flicked at flies with his eternal riding whip. Wait a minute, wait. Wait. Flicked at flies with his eternal riding whip. Is he like I'm imagining like a real ass whip, and he's just whipping flies out of the air, like just whoosh, whoosh. But I'm wondering if they mean something more like a riding crop. He's a dragoon. Oh right, he's dragoon. He's got a horse. Oh okay. Uh, I'm gonna Google something real quick. What's a horse whip look like? Oh, okay. So it's a riding crop. What's a dragoon look like? Are we gonna actually get like dragoons, or is it gonna be like? Of course, we get fantasy dragoons. What about dragoon real? Can I type that in? Okay, there we go. Oh my god, it's a dragoon! It's real! Look at that real dragoon! I like how it's giving me pictures of dragons. Dragoon real. Originally a class of mounted infantry who used horses for mobility, but dismounted to fight on foot. Okay, I had to confess, I didn't know what a dragoon was. I know of Legend of the Dragoon, a game for the PS1, but I didn't actually know what a dragoon was. Dragoons ride the horse to battle and then dismount. No, they jump good. Yeah, that's what I understand. What was it? I think it's what is it? Final Fantasy IV. That game taught me that dragoons jump good. That's what they do. They have spears and they jump good. Here we go. He wore his fatigue uniform with the braided jacket and jaunty cap. I noticed that his riding boots were all splashed with red mud. "Where have you been?" I inquired. "Jumping mud creeks in Jersey," he said. "I haven't had time to change yet. I was rather in a hurry to see you. Haven't you got a glass or something? I'm dead tired. Been in the saddle 24 hours. I gave him some brandy from my medicinal store, which he drank with a grimace. "Damned bad stuff," he observed. "I'll give it an address where they sell brandy that is brand." Yo, this tastes like shit. This is awful. They were originally named for their big gun. Interesting. I'm a dragoon and this is my boomstick. I'm a dragoon. Here's my dragoon. "It's good enough for my needs," I said indifferently. "I use it to rub my chest with." He stared and flicked at another fly. "See here, old fellow," he began. "I've got something to suggest to you. It's 4 years now that you've shut yourself up here like an owl, never going anywhere, never taking any healthy exercise, never doing a damn thing but poring over those books up there on the mantelpiece." He glanced along the row of shelves. Napoleon, 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 he read. "For heaven's sake, have you nothing but Napoleons here?" "These are my Napoleons. This is Napoleon, this is Napoleon, this is Napoleano. This is Nappy Jim." "I wish they were bound in gold," I said. "But wait, yes, there is another book. The King in Yellow." I looked him steadily in the eye. Have you ever read it? I asked. I? No, thank God. I don't want to be driven crazy. I saw he regretted his speech as soon as he had uttered it. There is only one word which I loathe more than I do lunatic, and that word is crazy. But I controlled myself, and asked him why he thought the King in Yellow dangerous. Oh, I don't know, he said hastily. I only remember the excitement it created and the denunciations from pulpit and press. I believe the author shot himself after bringing forth this monstrosity, didn't he? I understand he is still alive, I answered. That's probably true, he muttered. Bullets couldn't kill a fiend like that. It's a book of great truths, I said. Yes, he replied, of truths, which send men frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing is, as they say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have written it, and I, for one, shall never open its pages. Is that what you've come to tell me? I asked. No, he said. I came to tell you that I am going to be married. I believe for a moment my heart ceased to beat, but I kept my eyes on his face. Yes, he continued, smiling happily. Married to the sweetest girl on earth. Constance Hawberk, I said mechanically. How did you know? He cried, astonished. I didn't know it myself until that evening last April when we strolled down the embankment before dinner. How'd you know? How'd you know I was gonna marry that girl that I was making kissy faces at like 12 hours ago? How'd you guess? When is it to be? I asked. It was to have been next September, but an hour ago a dispatch came ordering our regiment to the Presidio, San Francisco. We leave at noon tomorrow. Tomorrow, he repeated. Just think, Hildred, tomorrow I shall be the happiest fellow that ever drew breath in this jolly world, for Constance will go with me. I offered him my hand in congratulation. He seized and shook it like the good-natured fool that he was, or pretended to be. I'm going to get my squadron as a wedding present. I'm going to get my squadron as a wedding present, he rattled on. Captain and Miss Louis Castaigne, eh, Hildred? Then he told me where it was to be and who were to be there, and made me promise to come and be best man. I set my teeth and listened to his boyish chatter without showing what I felt, but I was getting to the limit of my endurance, and when he jumped up and, switching his spurs till they jangled, said he must go, I did not detain him. There's one thing I want to ask of you, I said quietly. Out with it. It's promised, he laughed. I want you to meet me for a quarter of an hour's talk tonight. Of course, if you wish, he said, somewhat puzzled. Where? Anywhere. In the park there. What time, Hildred? Midnight. What in the name of... he began, but checked himself and laughed, assented. I watched him go down the stairs and hurry away, his saber banging at every stride. He turned into Bleecker Street, and I knew he was going to see Constance. I gave him 10 minutes to disappear, and then followed in his footsteps, taking with me the jeweled crown and the silken robe embroidered with the yellow sign. When I turned to Bleecker Street and entered the doorway which bore the sign, Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputations, third bell. I saw old Hawberk moving about in his shop, and imagined I'd heard Constance's voice in the parlor. But I avoided them both and hurried up the trembling stairways to Mr. Wilde's apartment. I knocked and entered without ceremony. Mr. Wilde lay groaning on the floor, his face covered in blood, his clothes torn to shreds. Drops of blood were scattered about over the carpet, which had also been ripped and frayed in the evidently recent struggle. It's that cursed cat, he said, ceasing his groans and turning his colorless eyes to me. She attacked me while I was asleep. I believe she will kill me yet. This was too much, so I went into the kitchen and, seizing a hatchet from the pantry, started to find the eternal beast, and settle her then and there. My search was fruitless, and after a while I gave it up and came back to find Mr. Wilde squatting on his high chair by the table. He had washed his face and changed his clothes. The great furrows which the cat's claws had plowed deep into his face he had filled with The great furrows which the cat's claws had plowed up in his face he had filled with collodion, and a rag hid the wound in his throat. I told him I should kill the cat when I came across her, but he only shook his head and turned the open ledger before him. He read name after name of the people who had come to him in regards to their reputation, and the sums he had amassed were startling. I put on the screws now and then, he explained. One day or other, some of these people will assassinate you, I insisted. Damn, colloidal silver? Colloidal silver? Alright, let's look up another word that I don't know. What the hell's colloidal? It's a mixture that has part of silver? Colloidal silver? Colloidal silver? Colloidal silver? Huh. I don't know. I'm blue and da ba dee ba 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 da ba dee ba ba da da ba dee ba ba ba. Anyway, actually, I'm gonna take a drink of some agua. It's just old medicine. It turns you blue. Ah, okay. Why are you blue? Aqua. Water. I drink the water. Liquid water. You can't just ask people why they're blue. Hold on. Hold on a sec. Was it a Breaking Bad thing? I thought it was something else. Maybe it is this. Me when I take too much colloidal silver.
Yo, I'm really sorry, okay? What is wrong with you? Why are you blue?
But that's not the clip I was thinking of, though. Isn't it like Arrested Development? Did they not just... I'm looking for, like, why are you blue, not, like... Ah, whatever. Never mind. Good enough. Breaking Bad's fine. I'm very worried to click the thing that says I blew myself. I'm good. I never watched Arrested Development, so I don't know what happens. I just know that there's, like, a clip where someone's like, why are you blue? Silver was basically the precursor to penicillin. Oh, okay. Alright. So, let's go ahead and keep on moving. Oh, hold on. My mic was away from my mouth. I gotta eat my mic. Anyway. One day or other, some of these people will assassinate you, I insisted. Do you think so? He said, rubbing his mutilated ears. It was useless to argue with him, so I took down the manuscript entitled Imperial Dynasty of America, for the last time I should ever take it down in Mr. Wilde's study. I read it through, thrilling and trembling with pleasure. When I had finished, Mr. Wilde took the manuscript, and turning to the dark passage which leads from his study to his bedchamber, called out in a loud voice, "Vance." Then, for the first time, I noticed a man crouching there in the shadow. How I had overlooked him during my search for the cat, I cannot imagine. "Vance, come in," cried Mr. Wilde. The figure rose and crept towards us, and I shall never forget the face that had raised to mine, as the light from the window illuminated it. So if you're feeling down, just eat a bunch of silver coins. It'll possibly cure you. Just eat a bunch of silver. So we're learning... There's so much we're learning from this story so far. Like, we've already got... if you're racist enough, you can beat racism. Suicide booths are cool and great, and they make everything better. Gentrification is great, especially when you shunt out all foreigners. Oh, what a wondrous, not at all kind of fashy utopia this guy's presented. Also, eat coins. um, I'd kill myself for a suicide Oh boy! The figure rose and crept toward. Vance, this is Mr. Castaigne, said Mr. Wilde. Before he had finished speaking, the man threw himself on the ground before the table, crying and grasping. Oh God! Oh my God, help me, forgive me! Oh, Mr. Castaigne, keep that man away! You cannot mean it! You are different, save me! I am broken down, I was in a madhouse, and now, when all was coming right, when I had forgotten the king in yellow, but I shall go mad again, I shall go mad! His voice died into a choking rattle, for Mr. Wilde had leapt on him and his right hand encircled the man's throat. When Vance fell into a heap on the floor, Mr. Wilde clambered nimbly into his chair again and rubbed his mangled ears with the stump of his hand, turning to me and asked me for the ledger. I reached down from the shelf and he opened it. After a moment's searching among the beautifully written pages, he coughed complacently and pointed to the name Vance. The really funny thing about him talking about French cafes is this guy loves France so much. I had to look him up and find out he wasn't French. This is the Lovecraft parallels are so fucking strong with this. Like, not only is it like weirdo cosmic horror that's never completely described, it's also a guy who has like a borderline obsessive thing with like another country. Because like for Lovecraft, it's like the English, the British, and for this guy, it's the French, where they're just like, oh, I love every country. I love this country that's not America. Oh fuck. Ugh. Sorry, I was readjusting myself in my chair. Lost track of where I am. Right. Right. He just choked out a man. Vance, he read aloud. Osgood Oswald Vance. At the sound of his name, the man on the floor raised his head and turned a convulsed face to Mr. Wilde. His eyes were injected with blood. His lips tumefied. Called April 28th, continued Mr. Wilde. Occupation, cashier in the Seaforth National Bank. Has served a term of forgery at Sing Sing, from whence he was transferred to an asylum for the criminally insane, pardoned by the governor of New York and discharged from the asylum January 19th, 1918. Reputation damaged at Sheepshead Bay. Rumors that he lives beyond his income. Reputation to be repaired at once. Retainer, 1,500. Note: has embezzled sums amounting to 30,000 since March 20th, 1919. Excellent family, and secured present position through uncle's influence. Father, president of Seaforth Bank. I looked at the man on the floor. Get up, Vance, said Mr. Wilde in a gentle voice. Vance rose as if hypnotized. He will do as we suggest now, observed Mr. Wilde, and opening the manuscript, he read the entire history of the imperial dynasty of America. Then, in a kind of soothing murmur, he ran over the important points with Vance, who stood like one stunned. Okay, so I'm starting to... So, like, real quick, before I continue, we were talking about, like, imperial history, the imperial dynasty of America. Is that some kind of alt history thing? I'm starting to wonder if that's got some other kind of, like, cursed book connotation to it. Like, maybe it's not, like, a literal thing. Maybe it's more of, like a metaphysical kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about? Like, maybe this isn't exactly what I think it is. Maybe it's something else. Because he's like, oh, that's true. Who's reading it? Then in a... Let's see. Who stood like one stunned. His eyes were so blank and vacant that I imagined he had become half-witted and remarked to Mr. Wilde, who had replied that it was of no consequence anyway. Very patiently, we pointed out to Vance that his share in the affair would be, what his share in the affair would be, and he seemed to understand after a while. Mr. Wilde explained that the manuscript, using several volumes on heraldry, to substantiate the results of his researches. He mentioned the establishment of the dynasty in Carcosa, the lakes which connected Hastur, Aldebaran, and the majesty of Hyades. He spoke of Casilda and Camilla, and sounded the cloudy depths of Demhe and the lake of Hali. The scalloped tatters of the king in yellow must hide Yatil forever, he muttered. But I do not believe Vance heard it. Then, by degrees, he led Vance along the ramifications of the imperial family to. I don't know how to pronounce this. Uoht. Uot. Ot. 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 To Ot. To Uat to Thale, from Nautalba and Phantom of Truth to Aldanes, and then tossing aside his manuscript of notes, he began the wonderful story of the last king. Fascinated and thrilled, I watched him. He threw up his head. His long arms were stretched out in a magnificent gesture of pride and power, and his eyes blazed deep in their sockets like two emeralds. Vance listened, stupefied. As for me, when at last Mr. Wilde had finished and pointing to me, cried, "The cousin of the king!" My head swam with excitement. You pronounce it by screaming silently at the top of your lungs. So, okay, so Viv, I gotta tell you, kind of glad there's some terms that I'm picking up here. Specifically, I remember from playing Sucker for Love, where I'm like, "Oh, Util, I know what that is. That's like a planet." It's like, I remember that. Oh, okay. I have context for this because I played a dating sim about it. Because like I was familiar with like the name of Hastur and like King in Yellow before, and then like not gonna lie, the game is the reason I finished reading the book. Yeah, I think I remember you telling me that actually. Because like that game, it didn't just go for like a ooh, it's a spooky thing, and we also put King in Yellow over it because it was a Lovecraft term. No, like that game actually very clearly took from this. Uh, so it's very interesting that like after playing like a parody game that was sort of taking influence from this, now we're actually looking at the source material, and I'm like, oh, there's some stuff that I actually have context for that if I didn't have it, all of this would be kind of mumbo jumbo for the most part. Though that's usually kind of the MO when it comes to Cosmic Horror to begin with. Where the hell was I? Controlling myself with superhuman effort, I explained to Vance why I alone was worthy of the crown, and why my cousin must be exiled or die. I made him understand that my cousin must never marry, even after renouncing all his claims, and how the least of all he should marry the daughter of the Marquis of Avonshire, and bring England into the question. I showed him a list of thousands of names which Mr. Wilde had drawn up. Every man whose name was there had received the L sign, which no living human dared to disregard. The city, the state, the whole land were ready to rise and tremble before the pallid mask. The time had come. The people should know the son of Hastur, and the whole world bow to the black stars which hang in the sky over Carcosa. It's supposed to be mumbo jumbo anyway. Yeah, fair point. Vance leaned on the table, his head buried in his hands. Mr. Wilde drew a rough sketch on the margin of yesterday's Herald with a bit of lead pencil. It was a plan of Hawberk's rooms. Then he wrote out the order and affixed the seal. And shaking like a palsied man, I signed my first writ of execution with my name, Hildred Rex. Wow, this escalated fast. Yeah, we're moving. We're moving. Mr. Wilde clambered to the floor and, unlocking the cabinet, took a long square box from the first shelf. This he brought to the table and opened. A new knife lay in the tissue paper inside, and I picked it up and handed it to Vance, along with the order and the plan of Hawberk's apartment. Then Mr. Wilde told Vance he could go. and he went shambling like an outcast of the slums. I sat for a while watching the daylight fade behind the square tower of the Judson Memorial Church, and finally gathering up the manuscript and notes, took my hat and started for the door. Mr. Wilde watched me in silence. When I had stepped into the hall, I looked back. Mr. Wilde's small eyes were still fixed on me. Behind him, the shadows gathered in the fading light. Then I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. I had eaten nothing since breakfast, but I was not hungry. A wretched, half-starved creature who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber noticed me and came up to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money, I don't know why, and he went away without thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached me and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced the yellow sign, and I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then with an uncertain glance at me, folded it with what seemed to me an exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the trees, and the new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wandered from the marble arch to the artillery stables, and back again to the lotos fountain. The flowers and grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountains played in the moonlight, and the musical splash of falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chain mail in Hobbitt's shop. It reminded me of the tinkle. It reminded me of the tinkle of chain mail. But it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparkle of the moonlight on the water brought no such sensations of exquisite pleasure. And when the sunshine played over the polished steel of the corselet on Hawberk's knee... Wait a minute. I just read a bunch of words, and I just did not register any of that. As when the sunshine played over the polished steel of a corselet on Hawberk's knee. I watched the bats darting and turning above the water plants in the fountain basin, but their rapid, jerky flight set my nerves on edge, and I went away again to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted, and the sally port was constantly filled with troopers in fatigue carrying straw and harness, and baskets filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry at the gates was changed while I wandered up and down the asphalt walk. I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The lights in the barracks went out one by one, and the barred gate was closed, and every minute or two an officer passed in through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs on the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterer had been driven away by the gray-coated park policeman. The car tracks along Wooster Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness was the stamping of the sentry's horse and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted, and military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire of St. Francis Xavier, and at the last stroke of the sad-toned bell, a figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis, returned the salute of the sentry, and crossing the street, entered the square and advanced toward the Benedict apartment house. "Lewis," I called. The man pivoted on his spurred heels and came straight towards me. "Is that you, Hildred? Yes, you are on time." I took his offered hand, and we strolled towards the lethal chamber. I love going for strolls to the lethal chamber. He rattled on about his wedding and the graces of Constance, and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's shoulder straps, and the triple gold arabesque on his sleeves and fatigue cap. I believe I listened as much to the music of his spurs and saber as I did to his boyish babble, and at last we stood under the elms at the 4th Street corner of the square opposite to the lethal chamber. Then he laughed and asked what I wanted with him. I motioned him to a seat on a bench under the electric light, and sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously, with that same searching glance which I hate and fear so in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know it, and I carefully concealed my feelings. "Well, old chap," he inquired, "what can I do for you?" I drew from my pocket the manuscript and notes of the Imperial Dynasty of America, and looking him in the eye, I said, I will tell you. On your word as a shoulder, on your word as a shoulder, on your word as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end, without asking me a question. Promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell later. I promise, if you wish it, he said pleasantly. Give me the paper, Hildred. He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air, which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyebrows contracted, and his lips seemed to form the word rubbish. Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently for my sake read, with an attempt at interest, which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when in the closely written pages. He started when in the closely written pages he came to his own name, and when he came to mine, he lowered the paper and looked sharply at me for a moment. But he kept his word and resumed his reading, and I let the half-formed question die on his lips unanswered. When he came to the end and read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigued cap up to his forehead, with a boyish gesture which I remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read, and when he finished, I took the notes with the manuscript and placed them in my pocket. Then I unfolded a scroll marked with the yellow sign. He had the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it, and I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. It is the yellow sign, I said angrily. Oh, that's it, is it? Said Lois. Said Louis. Hey, Lois, remember when I gave you the yellow sign? Said Lois. Oh, that's it, said Lois, in the flattering voice, which Dr. Archer used to employ with me, and would probably have employed again had I not settled his affair for him. My word, a shoulder. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. Listen, you have engaged your word? I am listening, old chap, he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. Dr. Archer, having by some means become possessed of the secret of the Imperial Secession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his house, in hopes of either driving me insane or poisoning me. I have not forgotten it. I visited him last night, and the interview was final. Uh, can you turn down the howling wind a tad? Yeah, I can do that. Let me turn down my spooky noises. Let me know if that's better. Uh, yeah, he killed that dude. He straight up murked that guy. Lewis turned quite pale, but did not move. I resumed triumphantly. There are yet 3 people to be interviewed in the interest of Mr. Wilde and myself. They are my cousin Lewis, Mr. Hawberk, and his daughter Constance. Lewis sprang to his feet, and I arose also, and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. Oh, I don't need that to tell you what I have to say, I cried, with a laugh of triumph. You must renounce the crown to me, do you hear? To me. Lewis looked at me with a startled air, but recovering himself said kindly, Of course I renounce what is it I must renounce? The crown, I said angrily. Of course, he answered. I renounce it. Come, old chap, I'll walk back to your rooms with you. Don't try any of your doctor's tricks with me, I cried, trembling with fury. Don't act as if you think I am insane. What nonsense, he replied. Come, it's getting late, Hildred. No, I shouted. You must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile, but if you refuse, you shall die. He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him how they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat cut open, and I laughed in his face when I thought of Vance and his knife, and the order signed by me. Ah, you are the king, I cried, but I shall be king. Who are you to keep me from empire over the all of all? Damn it! Who are you to keep me from empire over all the habitable earth? I was born cousin of the king, but I shall be king. Lewis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up 4th Street, entered the gate of the lethal temple, and traversed the path to the bronze doors at full speed, and plunged into the death chamber with a cry of one demented. And I laughed until I wept tears, for I had recognized Vance, and knew that Hawberk and his daughter were no longer in my way. Go, I cried to Lewis. You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now, and if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you as I did the doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow. I turned and darted into South Fifth Avenue. With a cry of terror, Lewis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into a doorway under Hawberk's sign. He cried, "Halt, or I fire!" But when he saw that I flew up the stairs, leaving Hawberk's shot below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at their door as though it were possible to arouse the dead. Mr. Wilde's door was open. I entered, crying, "It is done! It is done! Let the nations rise and look upon their king!" But I could not find Mr. Wilde, so I went to the cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe, embroidered with the yellow sign, and placed the crown upon my head. At last I was king, king by my right in Hastur, king because I knew the mystery of the Hyades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the Lake of Hali. I was king. The first gray pencilings of dawn would raise a tempest which would shake two hemispheres. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, faint with the joy and splendor of my thought. Without, in the darkest passage, with a wait, damn it, I'm ruining, I'm ruining my dramaticism. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, faint with the joy and splendor of my thought. Without, in the dark passage, a man groaned. I seized the tallow dip and sprang to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out, but my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard her screech, and I knew that my knife had found her. For a moment I listened to her tumbling and fumbling about in the darkness, and then when her frenzy ceased, I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor with his throat torn open. At first I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came into his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment, my terror and despair gave place to hope, but as I bent over him, his eyeballs rolled clean around in his head, and he died. Then, while I stood transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and every ambition, my very life lying prostrate there with the dead master, they came, seized me from behind, and bound me until my veins stood out like cords, and my voice filled with the paroxysms of my frenzied screams. But I still raged, bleeding and infuriated among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then, when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Hawberk, and behind him my cousin Lewis's ghastly face, and farther away in the corner, a woman, Constance, weeping softly. "Ah, I see it now," I shrieked. "You have seized the throne and the empire. Woe, woe to you who are crowned with the king in yellow." Editor's note: Mr. Castine died yesterday in the asylum for the criminally insane. So that was The Repairer of Reputations. Hey, that was pretty good. I like that. I liked that one. That was pretty cool. I mean, I could do with that. Like, it still had that touch of like old timey like racism or whatever, but that was pretty good. Like that was pretty good. That's like because it's so like again like it has what like Lovecraft would start to pin down. Excuse me. Reputation fixed. Um, Yeah, I like that last third a lot too, because then it really started to kick up. Like it was like, let's go, and it started to because it's one of those stories where like, how do I phrase it? Uh, Dark Souls font, reputation repaired. This is one of those stories that I don't come across them often, but I really like how they do it, where you start the story and it's a first person narrator and they seem well put together at first, but it's like as they're telling their story they're becoming like more and more unhinged, and it's becoming very much like clearer and clearer and clearer that like you are reading from the perspective of an absolute nutball. Yeah, gradual descent into madness. I've seen descent into madness. I've seen stories where someone goes from like 0 to 60, but it's a little rarer that you find a story that has a little bit of a slower burn to it. Like, I don't know if it needed. Actually, I don't know. I kind of like the science fiction future aspect of it because I was kind of thinking like, oh, why was that necessary? And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know. I guess it kind of adds to the like to the strangeness of it because like at face value, you could look at this uh as like the story from the perspective of someone who is 100% criminally insane, who is just like like ranting and raving about all this nonsense. And it's just in this science fiction time period. It's just in a world that this guy put together of just like, hey, this is the future. This is how I see it. It's kind of unfortunate that he really thought it was like, oh, there's no bigotry or hate anymore because we out racist everybody. We were just so racist that we didn't have to be racist anymore. But anyway, so it's interesting. That was a neat one. How long is this next one? Is it well, actually it's not too long. We could probably let's see. Oh, you know what? These next two stories are like very short, I think. And I think we could probably knock out a couple. I think we could do that. Yeah. Let's go ahead and keep going. I'm having a good time with this. I kind of like the how all of this has been put together so far. We'll go for like another 40 minutes. We'll do our standard like 3 hour read stream. But yeah, this has been cool so far. I kind of like I'm liking this. By my understanding, the rest of these stories are a little bit less like macabre than the first. But hey, whatever. We'll see. Hold on. Let me actually, you know what? You know what? Real quick. Real quick. I'm gonna do go ahead and get up and stretch real quick and grab some more water and a snack. And then we will come back. We'll do a couple more stories and then we'll call it. I will be right back. And in the meanwhile, I'm gonna put my Donkey Kong music back on. That's the wrong music. Why does it always do that? There we go. Wiggle your stumps. Everybody wiggle your stumps. Get them wiggling. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. Alright, I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I have returned. Silence the Donkey Kong. Resume the creaky noises. I have my water. I had some. I got some stretchies. I wiggled my stumps. Stump status has been wiggled. I had some. I had some sweetened dried mango because one of my favorite snacks is shoe leather covered in sugar. Mm. I'm gonna take a little drink real quick. I love fruit leather. I love eating leathery fruit. All right. Whew. So, I think we'll go ahead and get back to it. This next story is called The Mask. And I believe it starts with a little bit from the King in Yellow play that we've been hearing reference of. Camilla, you, sir, should unmask. Stranger, indeed? Camilla, indeed, it's time. We all have laid aside disguise but you. Stranger, I wear no mask. Camilla, terrified, aside to Casilda, no mask! No mask! The King in Yellow, Act 1, Scene 2. Although I knew nothing of chemistry, I listened fascinated. He picked up on Easter lily, which Genevieve had brought that morning from Notre Dame, and dropped it into the basin. Instantly, the liquid lost its crystalline clearness. For a second, Lily was enveloped in a milk-white foam which disappeared, leaving the fluid opalescent. Changing tints of orange and crimson played over the surface, and then what seemed to be a ray of pure sunlight struck through the bottom where the lily was resting. At the same instant, he plunged his hand into the basin and drew out the flower. There is no danger, he explained, if you choose the right moment. The golden ray is the signal. He held the lily towards me, and I took it in my hand. It had turned to stone, to the purest marble. You see, he said, it is without flaw. What sculptor could reproduce it? The marble was white as snow, but in its depths the veins of the lily were tinged with the palest azure, and a faint flush lingered deep in its heart. Don't ask me the reason of that, he smiled, noticing my wonder. I have no idea why the veins and heart are tinted, but they always are. Yesterday I tried one of Genevieve's gold fish. There it is. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The fish looked as if sculpted in marble, but if you held it to the light, the stone was beautifully veined with a faint blue, and from where somewhere within came a rosy light, like the tint which slumbers in an opal. I looked into the basin. Once more it seemed filled with clearest crystal. If I should touch it now? I demanded. I don't know, he replied, but you'd better not try. There's one thing I'm curious about, I said, and that is where the ray of sunlight, where the ray of sunlight came from. It looked like a sunbeam, true enough, he said. I don't know. It always comes when I immerse any living thing. Perhaps, he continued, smiling, perhaps it is the vital spark of the creature escaping to the source from whence it came. I saw he was mocking, and threatened him with a mahl stick, but he only laughed and changed the subject. Stay to lunch, Genevieve. Stay to lunch. Genevieve will be here directly. I saw her going to early mass, I said, and she looked as fresh and as sweet as that lily before you destroyed it. Do you think I destroyed it? Said Boris gravely. Destroyed, preserved, how can we tell? We sat in the corner of a studio near his unfinished group of fates. Near his unfinished group of the fates. He leaned back on the sofa, twirling a sculptor's chisel and squinting at his work. By the way, he said, I have finished pointing up that old academic Ariadne. Ariadne? 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 Ariad Ari Ariadne? Ariadne? of Ariana Grande. Ariande. Ariande. Oh, it's a Greek. Oh, it's a Greek thing. Daughter Persephone and King Mind. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Boop, boop. By the way, he said, I have finished pointing up that old academic Arianda, and I suppose it will have to go to the salon. It's all I have ready this year, but after the success the Madonna brought me, I feel ashamed to send a thing like that. The Madonna, an exquisite marble for which Genevieve had sat, had been the sensation of last year's salon. I looked at the Ariadne. It was a magnificent piece of technical work, but I agreed with Boris that the world would expect something better of him than that. Still, it was impossible now to think of finishing in time for the salon, that splendid, terrible group half shrouded in marble behind me. The fates would have to wait. We were proud of Boris Ivan. We claimed him, and he claimed us on the strength of his having been born in America. Although his father was French and his mother was a Russian, everyone in the Beaux Arts called him Boris. And yet there were only two of us who addressed him in the same familiar way, Jack Scott and myself. Perhaps my being in love with Genevieve had nothing to do with his affection for me, not that it had ever been acknowledged between us. But after all was settled, and she had told me with tears in her eyes it was Boris whom she loved, I went over to his house and congratulated him. The perfect cordiality of that interview did not deceive either of us. I always believed, although to one at least, I always believed, although to one at least, it was a great comfort. I do not think he and Genevieve ever spoke of the matter together, but Boris knew. Genevieve was lovely. The Madonna like purity of her face might have been inspired by the Sanctus in Gounod's Mass, but I was always glad that when she managed to when she, blah, blah. But I was always glad when she changed that mood for what we called her April maneuvers. She was often as variable as an April day. In the morning, grave, dignified and sweet. At noon, laughing, capricious, and evening, whatever one least expected. I preferred her so rather than in the Madonna-like tranquillity which stirred the depths of my heart. I was dreaming of Genevieve when we spoke again. What do you think of my discovery, Alec? I think it wonderful. I shall make no use of it, you know, beyond satisfying my own curiosity, so far as may be, and the secret will die with me. It would be rather a blow to. I did so well with that last story. Now I'm fumbling over everything. It would be rather a blow to sculpture, would it not? We painters lose more than we ever gain by photography. Boris nodded, playing with the edge of his chisel. The new vicious discovery would corrupt the world of art. No, I shall never confide the secret to anyone, he said slowly. It would be hard to find anyone less informed about such phenomena than myself. But of course I had heard of mineral springs so saturated with silica that the leaves and twigs which fell into them were turned to stone after a time. I dimly comprehended the process, how the silica replaced the vegetable matter atom by atom, and the result was a duplicate of the object in stone. This, I confess, had never interested me greatly, and as for the ancient fossils thus produced, they disgusted me. Boris, it appeared, feeling curiosity instead of repugnance, had investigated the subject, and had accidentally stumbled on a solution which, attacking the immersed object with ferocity unheard of, in a second did the work of years. This was all I could make out of the strange story he'd been telling me. He spoke again after a long silence. I'm almost frightened when I think of what I have found. Scientists would go mad over the discovery. It was so simple, too. It discovered itself. When I think of that formula and that new element precipitated in metallic scales. What new element? Oh, I haven't thought of naming it, and I don't believe I ever shall. There are enough precious metals now in the world to cut throats over. I pricked up my ears. Have you struck gold, Boris? No, better. But see here, Alec, he laughed, starting up. You and I have all we need in this world. Ah, how sinister and covetous you look already. I laughed too, and I told him I was devoured by the desire for gold, and we had better talk of something else. So when Genevieve came in shortly after, we had turned our backs on alchemy. Genevieve was dressed in silvery gray from head to foot. The light glinted along the soft curves of her fair hair, and she turned her cheek to Boris. Then she saw me and returned my greeting. She had never before failed to blow me a kiss from the tips of her white fingers, and I promptly complained of the omission. She smiled and held out her hand, which dropped almost before it had touched mine. Then she said, looking at Boris, "You must ask Alec to stay for luncheon." This was also something new. She had always asked me herself until today. "I did," said Boris shortly. "And you said yes, I hope." She turned to me with a charming conventional smile. I might have been an acquaintance of the day before yesterday. I made her a low bow. Let's see. Okay, let's see if I can do this French. Uh, Fauve bien la Hainaut, madame. But refusing to take up our usual bantering tone, she murmured a hospitable commonplace and disappeared. Boris and I looked at one another. "I had better go home, don't you think?" I asked. "Hanged if I know," he replied frankly. While we were discussing the advisability of my departure, Genevieve reappeared in the doorway without her bonnet. She was wonderfully beautiful, but her color was too deep and her lovely eyes were too bright. She came straight up to me and took my arm. "Luncheon is ready." Was I cross, Alec? I thought I had a headache, but I haven't. "Come here, Boris." And she slipped the other arm through his. "Alec knows that after you there is no one in the world whom I like as well as I like him. So if he sometimes feels snubbed, it won't hurt him." "Ah, la bonheur, à la bonheur," I cried. "Who says there are no thunderstorms in April?" "Are you ready?" chanted Boris. "Aye, ready," and arm in arm, we raced to the dining room, scandalizing the servants. The the today the polycule skips to lunch. After all, let's see, scandalizing the servants. After all, we were not so much to blame. Genevieve was 18, Boris was 23, and I not quite 21. Is that creepy? I don't know if that's as creepy. 18 and like 20, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, it's like 5. I don't know. That's a little sketch. It's a little sketch. Yeah, it's creepy. Yeah, it's creepy. All right. Yeah, it's creepy. 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 Some work that I was doing about this time on decorations for Genevieve's boudoir kept me constantly at the quaint little hotel in the Rue Saint Cecile. Boris and I in those days labored hard. Just a moment. Yes.
You said 18 to 25? Is that what you said?
What are you talking about?
You're counting like age difference? Is that what you said?
Yeah, there's because we've got a character describing that she's like skipping along with like two men at her side, but she's 18 and one is 21 and the other is 23.
Fun fact, being 18 in the 1800s was considered being like a spinster. It's horrible, don't get me wrong. That's why Lewis Carroll's a piece of shit. But 18 and not married?
Oh, you're 18 and unmarried, you old sow. What good are you? You have. What are you, 16 and you haven't found a man?
15 and no children.
14 and you're not a grandmother? What purpose do you serve?
We went from Victorian era to Alabama.
Oh, God. Okay, let's not keep this conversation going. Are you, Fun fact, everybody who's listening, we had to try and find a car battery today, and we went all over town trying to find one goddamn car battery, and we just couldn't find the goddamn thing. And now we've just ordered it, and it's coming in, and now my partner's heading out to like go grab it. Are we still getting Wendy's? Do you still want to get Wendy's? Chat, should we get Wendy's? Is anyone listening? Should we get Wendy's? Reply if you think we should get Wendy's. Okay, someone said Wendy's, so we can do Wendy's.
What does chat want?
Chat, Culver's is better, yo. Do we want Culver's?
Chat, do we want
Do no, for legit. Do we want Wendy's or Culver's?
Do you want Frosties or do you want crinkle cut?
I do really want the Frosty, actually. What about you? What do you want?
We'll get the Frosties.
Culver's is better. Get it? Get her? Get her. Yeah, I'll probably have wrapped up this story by the time you get back. So, yeah, I'm still I'm still down for the Wendy's, just because I want those Frosties after what a fucking dick ass day it has been up to this point.
Go back to reading your spinster novel.
Go back to reading my cosmic horror spinster novel. Love you too. Be safe. All right, let's wrap this. Let's go ahead and wrap this. We'll probably just finish this story, and then we'll probably put it up so that I can get Wendy's when it comes home. Excuse me. Some work that I was doing about this time on the decoration. Excuse me. On the decorations for Genevieve's. Oh my god! Why do I keep hiccuping while I'm trying to read? This is a bad time. Some work that I was doing about this time on the decorations for Genevieve's boudoir kept me constantly at the quaint little hotel in the Rue Saint Cecile. Boris and I in those days labored hard, but as we pleased, which was fitfully, and we all three, with Jack Scott, idled a great deal together. One quiet afternoon I had been wandering alone over the house examining curios, prying into odd corners, bringing out sweetmeats and cigars from strange hiding places. And at last I stopped in the bathing room. Boris, all over clay, stood there washing his hands. The room was built of rose-colored marble, excepting the floor, which was tessellated in rose and gray. In the center was a square pool sunken below the surface of the floor. Steps led down to it, sculpted pillars supported a frescoed ceiling, and a delicious marble Cupid appeared to have just alighted on his pedestal at the upper end of the room. The whole interior was Boris's work and mine. Boris, in his hard-working clothes of white canvas, scraped the traces of clay and red modeling wax from his handsome hands, and coquetted over his shoulder. Coquetted over his shoulder with the Cupid. I see you, he insisted. Don't try to look the other way and pretend not to see me. You know who made you, little humbug. It was always my role to interpret Cupid's sentiments in these conversations, and when my turn came, I responded in such a manner that Boris seized my arm and dragged me towards the pool, declaring he would duck me. Next instant, he dropped my arm and turned pale. Good God, he said, I forgot this pool is full of the solution. I shivered a little, and dryly advised him to remember better where he had stored the precious liquid. In heaven's name, why do you keep a small lake of that gruesome stuff here, of all places? I asked. I want to experiment on something large, he replied. On me, for instance? Ah, that came too close for jesting. But I do want to watch the action of that solution on a more highly organized living body. There is that big white rabbit, he said, following me into the studio. Jack Scott, wearing a paint-stained jacket, came wandering in, appropriated all the Oriental sweetmeats he could lay his hands on, looted the cigarette case, and finally he and Boris disappeared together to visit the Luxembourg Gallery, where a new silver bronze by Rodin and a landscape of Monet's were claiming the exclusive attention of artistic France. I went back to the studio and resumed my work. It was a Renaissance screen, which Boris wanted me to paint for Genevieve's boudoir. But the small boy who was unwillingly dawdling through the series of poses for it today refused all bribes to be good. He never rested an instant in the same position, and instead of 5 minutes, I had as many as different outline. And inside of 5. He never rested an instant in the same position, and inside of 5 minutes, I had as many different outlines of the little beggar. Are you posing, or are you executing a song and dance, my friend? I inquired. Whichever monsieur pleases, he replied, with an angelic smile. Of course I dismissed him for the day, and of course I paid him for the full time, that being the way we spoil our models. You'll get it. You'll get it. I can do it. I can read good. I can read real good. I can do it. It'd be one thing if I only stumbled over my words while reading these like really old texts, but I was still stumbling over my words on in Goosebumps on Tuesday. I can't read. I'm not good at reading. After the young imp had gone, I made a few perfunctory daubs at my work, but was so thoroughly out of humor that it took me the rest of the afternoon to undo the damage I had done. So at last I scraped my palette, struck my brushes in a bowl of black soap, and strolled into the smoking room. I really believe I really believe that, excepting Genevieve's apartments, no room in the house was so free from the perfume of tobacco as this one. It was a queer chaos of odds and ends, hung with threadbare tapestry. A sweet-toned old spinet in good repair stood by the window. There were stands of weapons, some old and dull, others bright and modern, festoons of Indian and Turkish armor over the mantel, two or three good pictures, and a pipe rack. It was there that we used to come for new sensations in smoking. I doubt if any type of pipe ever existed which was not represented on that rack. When we had selected one, we immediately carried it somewhere else and smoked it, for that place was, on the whole, more gloomy and less inviting than any in the house. But this afternoon the twilight was very soothing. The rugs and skins on the floor looked brown and soft and drowsy. The big couch was piled with cushions. I found my pipe and curled up there for an unaccustomed smoke in the smoking room. He was smoking. A lot of smoke. Do you get that? Did you hear? Did you hear that he's getting a pipe for his smoking? He's smoking a pipe. They have many pipes for smoking. They're smoking the pipes. They're pipes that they're smoking. They're smoking them. They're smoking the pipes. Do you understand? They have a lot of pipes and they're smoking them and they're smoking and they never stop smoking and they never stop. The smoking never ends. This is good. This is a good bit. This is a good bit that I decided to do. Everyone laughed. Everyone thought it was really funny. Dunny's smoking fetish. On, I have to re-smallin myself. Boop. Crap, where was I? The big couch was piled with cushions. I found my pipe and curled up there for an unaccustomed smoke in the smoking room. I had chosen one with a long, flexible stem, and lighting it fell to dreaming. After a while it went out, but I did not stir. I dreamed on, and presently fell asleep. I awoke to the saddest music I had ever heard. The room was quite dark. I had no idea what time it was. A ray of moonlight silvered one edge of the old spinet, and the polished wood seemed to exhale the sounds of as perfume floats above a box of sandalwood. Someone rose in the darkness and came away weeping quietly, and I was fool enough to cry out, "Genevieve!" She dropped at my voice, and I had time to curse myself while I made a light and tried to raise her from the floor. She shrank away with a murmur of pain. She was very quiet, and I asked for Boris. I carried her to the divan, and we went to look for him, and then went to look for him. But he was not in his house. He was not in the house, and the servants were gone to bed. Perplexed and anxious, I hurried back to Genevieve, where she lay. She lay where I had left her, looking very white. "I can't find Boris, nor any of the servants," I said. "I know," she answered faintly. "Boris has gone to Epps with Mr. Scott. I did not remember when I sent you for him just now. But he can't get back in the case before tomorrow afternoon, and are you hurt? Did I frighten you into falling? What an awful fool I am, but I was only half awake. Boris thought you had gone home before dinner. Do please excuse us for letting you stay here all this time." "I had a long nap," I laughed. "So sound that I did not know whether I was still asleep or not when I found myself staring at a figure that was moving towards me, and called out your name. Have you been trying the old spinet? You must have played very softly. I would tell 1,000 more lies worse than that one to see the look of relief that came into her face. She smiled adorably and said in her natural voice, "Alec, I tripped on that wolf's head, and I think my ankle is sprained. Please call Marie and then go home." I did as she bade, and left her there where the maid came in. At noon next day, when I called, I found Boris walking restlessly about his studio. Genevieve is asleep now, he told me. The sprain is nothing. But why should she have such a high fever? The doctors can't account for it, or else he will not. The doctors can't account for it, or else he will not, he muttered. Genevieve has a fever, I asked. I should say so, and has actually been a little light-headed at the intervals all night. The idea! Gay little Genevieve. Gay little Genevieve is what it says on my business cards. Did he just ollie out at her? He did a sick kickflip right into her. The idea that gay little Genevieve, without a care in the world, and she keeps saying her heart's broken and she wants to die. My own heart stood still. Boris leaned against the door of his studio, looking down, his hands in his pockets. His kind, keen eyes clouded, a new line of trouble drawn over the mouth's good mark that made the smile. The maid had orders to summon him the instant Genevieve opened her eyes. We waited, and Boris, growing restless, wandered about, fussing with modeling wax and red clay. Suddenly, he started for the next room. Come and see my rose-colored bath of death, he cried. Is it death? I asked him, to humor his mood. You are not prepared to call it life, I suppose, he answered. As he spoke, he plucked a solitary goldfish, squirming and twisting out of its globe. We'll send this one out after the other, whichever that is, he said. There were feverish excitement in his voice. A dull weight of fever lay on my limbs and on my brain as I followed him to the fair crystal pool, with its pink-tinted sides. And he dropped the creature in. Falling, its scales flashed a hot orange gleam in its angry twistings and contortions. The moment it struck the liquid, it became rigid and sank heavily to the bottom. Then came the milky foam, the splendid hues radiating on the surface, and then the shaft of pure serene light broke through from seemingly infinite depths. Boris plunged his hand and drew out an exquisite marble thing, blue-veined, rose-tinted, and glistening with opalescent drops. Did... I... So you put a living thing in it, and then it turns it into art? Should you be really sticking your whole ass hand in there? Should you really be sticking your hand in there? I don't think you should be doing that. It's just my opinion. I don't think you ought to be doing that. Child's play, he muttered, and looked wearily, longingly at me, as if I could answer such questions. Yes, art is made of stupids. He wants his hand to get rock hard. Child's play, he muttered, and looked wearily, longingly at me, as if I could answer such questions. But Jack Scott came in and entered into the game, as he called it, with Ardor. Nothing would do but to try the experiment on the white rabbit then and there. I was willing that Boris should find distraction from his cares, but I hated to see life go out of a warm, living creature, and I declined to be present. Picking up a book at random, I sat down in the studio to read. Alas, I had found The King in Yellow. King in Yellow. After a few moments, which seemed ages, I was putting it away with a nervous shudder. When Boris and Jack came in bringing their marble rabbit, at the same time the bell rang above, and a cry came from the sick room. Boris was gone like a flash, and the next moment he called, Jack, run for the doctor. Bring him back with you. Alec, come here. I went and stood at her door. A frightened maid came out in haste and ran away to fetch some remedy. Genevieve, sitting bolt upright with crimson cheeks and glittering eyes, babbled incessantly and resisted Boris's gentle restraint. He called me to help. At my first touch, she sighed and sank back, closing her eyes, and then, as we still bent above her, she opened them again, looked straight into Boris's face, poor fever-crazed girl, and told her secret. At the same instant, our 3 lives turned into new channels. The bond that held us together snapped forever, and a new bond was forged in its place, for she had spoken my name, and as the fever tortured her, her heart poured out its load of hidden sorrow. Amazed and dumb, I bowed my head, while my face burned like a live coal, and the blood surged in my ears. How long is this? Okay. And the blood surged in my ears, stupefying me with its clamor. Incapable of movement, incapable of speech, I listened to her feverish words in agony of shame and sorrow. I could not silence her. I could not look at Boris. Then I felt an arm upon my shoulder, and Boris turned a bloodless face to mine. It's not your fault, Alec. Don't grieve so if she loves you. But he could not finish. And as the doctor stepped swiftly into the room, saying, "Ah, the fever," I seized Jack Scott and hurried into the street, saying Boris would rather be alone. We crossed the street to our own apartments, and that night, seeing I was going to be ill too, he went for the doctor again. The last thing I recollect with any distinctness was hearing Jack say, "For heaven's sake, doctor, what ails him to wear a face like that?" And I thought of the king in yellow and the pallid mask. I was very ill, for the strain of 2 years which I had endured since that fatal May morning when Genevieve when Genevieve murmured, "I love you, but I think I love Boris best," told on me at last. I had never imagined that I could become more than I could endure. Outwardly tranquil, I had deceived myself, although the inward battle raged night after night, and I, lying alone in my room, cursed myself for the rebellious thoughts unloyal to Boris and unworthy of Genevieve. The morning always brought relief, and I returned to Genevieve and to my dear Boris with a heart washed clean by the tempests of the night. Never in word or deed or thought while with them I had betrayed my sorrow even to myself. The mask of self-deception was no longer a mask for me. It was a part of me. Night lifted it, laying bare the stifled truth below. But there was no one to see except myself, and when the day broke, the mask fell back again of its own accord. These thoughts passed through my troubled mind as I lay sick, but they were hopelessly entangled with visions of white creatures heavy as stone, crawling about in Boris's basin, of the wolf's head on the rug, foaming and snapping at Genevieve, who lay smiling beside it. I thought, too, of the king in yellow, wrapped in fantastic colors, of his tattered mantle, and the bitter cry of Casilda, "Not upon us, O king, not upon us." Feverishly I struggled to put it from me, but I saw the Lake of Hali, thin and blank, without a ripple or wind to stir it, and I saw the towers of Carcosa behind the moon, Aldebaran, the Hyades, Alar, Hastur, gilded through the cloud rifts which fluttered and flapped as they passed, like the scalloped tatters of the king in yellow. Among all these, one same thought perished. It never wavered, no matter what else was going on in my disordered mind, that my chief reason for existing was to meet some requirement of Boris and Genevieve. What this obligation was, its nature, was never clear. Sometimes it seemed to be protection, sometimes support through a great crisis. Whatever it seemed to be for the time, its weight rested only on me, and I was never so ill or so weak that I did not respond with my whole soul. There were always crowds of faces about me, mostly strange, but a few I recognized, Boris among them. Afterward, they told me that this could not have been, but I know that once at least he bent over me. It was only a touch, a faint echo of his voice. Then the clouds settled back on my senses, and I lost him. But he did stand there and bend over me at least once, at least. At last, one morning, I awoke to find the sunlight falling across my bed, and Jack Scott reading beside me. I had not strength enough to speak aloud, neither could I think, much less remember, but I could smile feebly as Jack's eye met mine, and when he jumped up and asked eagerly if I wanted anything, I could whisper, "Yes, Boris." Jack moved to the head of my bed and leaned down to arrange my pillow. I did not see his face, but he answered heartily, "You must wait, Alec. You are too weak to even see Boris." I waited, and I grew strong. In a few days, I was able to see whom I would, but meanwhile I had thought and remembered. From the moment when all the past grew clear again in my mind, I never doubted what I should do when the time came, and I felt sure that Boris would have resolved upon the same course so far as he was concerned. As for what pertained to me alone, I knew he would see that also as I did. I no longer asked for anyone. I never inquired why no message came from them. Why during the week I lay there, waiting and growing stronger. I never heard their names spoken. Preoccupied with my own searchings for the right way, and with my feeble but determined fight against despair, I simply acquiesced in Jack's reticence, taking for granted that he was afraid to speak of them, lest I should turn unruly and insist on seeing them. Meanwhile, I said over and over to myself, how would it be when life began again for us all? We would take up our relations exactly as they were before Genevieve fell ill. Boris and I would look into each other's eyes, and there would be then neither rancor nor cowardice, nor mistrust in that glance. I would be with them for a little while, in the dear intimacy of their home, and then, without pretext or explanation, I would disappear from their lives forever. Boris would know. Genevieve, the only comfort was that she would never know. Wait, hold on a second. Boris would know. Genevieve, the only comfort was that she would never know. It seemed as I thought it over that I had found the meaning of that sense of obligation which had persisted all throughout my delirium, and the only possible answer to it. So, when I was quite ready, I beckoned Jack to me one day and said, Jack, I want Boris at once, and take my dearest greeting to Genevieve. When at last he made me understand that they were both dead. Shit! Oh, damn. Oh, shit. Okay. When at last he made me understand that they were both dead, I fell into a wild rage that tore all my little convalescent strength to atoms. I raved and cursed myself into a relapse from which I crawled forth some weeks afterward, a boy of 21 who believed that his youth was gone forever. I seemed to be past the capability of further suffering, and one day when Jack handed me a letter and the keys to Boris's house, I took them without a tremor and asked him to tell me all. It was cruel of me to ask him, but there was no help for it, and he leaned wearily on his thin hands to reopen the wound, which could never entirely heal. He began very quietly. Alec, unless you have a clue that I have nothing about, you will not be able to explain any more than I what has happened. I suspect that you would rather not hear these details, but you must learn them, or else will learn them, else I would spare you the relation. God knows I wish I could be spared the telling. I shall use few words. That day, when I left you at the doctor's care and came back to Boris, I found him working on the fates. Genevieve, he said, was sleeping under the influence of drugs. She had been quite out of her mind, he said. He kept on working, not talking any more, and I watched him. Before long, I saw that the third figure of the group, the one looking straight ahead out over the world, bore his face. Not that you ever saw it, but as it looked then into the end. This is one thing for which I would like to find an explanation, but I never shall. Well, he worked, and I watched him in silence, and we went on that way until nearly midnight. Then he heard the door open and shut sharply, and a swift rush in the next room. Boris sprang through the doorway, and I followed, but we were too late. She lay at the bottom of the pool, her hands across her breast. Then Boris shot himself through the heart. Jack stopped speaking. Drops of sweat stood under his eyes, and his thin cheeks twitched. I carried Boris to his room. Then I went back and let that hellish fluid out of the pool, and turning on all the water, washed the marble clean of every drop. When at length I dared descend the steps, I found her lying there as white as snow. At last, when I had decided what was best to do, I went into the laboratory, and first emptied the solution in the basin into the waste pipe. Then I poured the contents of every jar and bottle after it. There was wood in the fireplace, so I built a fire, and breaking the locks of Boris's cabinet, I burnt every paper, notebook, and letter that I found there. With a mallet from the studio, I smashed to pieces all the empty bottles, and loading them into a coal scuttle, I carried them to the cellar and threw them over the red-hot bed of the furnace. 6 times I made the journey, and at last not a vestige remained of anything which might again aid in seeking the formula which Boris had found. Then at last I dared to call the doctor. He is a good man, and together we struggled to keep it from the public. Without him, I would never have succeeded. At last we got the servants paid and sent away into the country, where old Rosier keeps them quiet with stories of Boris and Genevieve's travels in distant lands, from whence they will not return for years. We buried Boris in the little cemetery of Sèvres. The doctor is a good creature, and knows when to pity a man who can bear no more. He gave a certificate of heart of disease. Yeah, blah, blah. He gave a certificate of heart disease and asked no questions of me. Then, lifting his head from his hands, he said, "Open the letter, Alec. It's for us both." I tore it open. It was Boris's will dated a year before. Just a sec. Wait, so the fates of the statues over the chamber from the last story, right? That's what I'm interpreting it as. I'm assuming he made the statue of the fates that was in the first story, which is super interesting. I like how interconnected this is. Oh my god, it's like a Marvel multiverse. um, Open the letter, Alec. It is for us both. I tore it open. It was Boris's will, dated a year before. He left everything to Genevieve, and in case of her dying childless, I was to take control of the house in the Rue Saint Cecile, and Jack Scott the management at EPT. EPT, EPT. On our deaths, the property reverted to his mother's family in Russia, with the exception of the sculpted marbles executed by himself. These he left to me. The page blurred under our eyes, and Jack got up and walked to the window. Presently he returned and sat down again. I dreaded to hear what he was going to say, but he spoke with the same simplicity and gentleness. Genevieve lies before the Madonna in the marble room. The Madonna bends tenderly above her, and Genevieve smiles back to that calm face that would never have been except for her. His voice broke, but he grasped at my hand, saying, "Courage, Alec." Next morning, he left for Epps to fulfill his trust. The same evening, I took the keys and went into the house. I went into the house I had known so well. Everything was in order, but the silence was terrible. Though I went twice to the door of the marble room, I could not force myself to enter. It was beyond my strength. I went into the smoking room and sat down before the spinet. A small lace handkerchief lay on the keys. I turned and I lay on the keys, and I turned away, choking. It was plain I could not. It was blah 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 blah. Choking. It was plain I could not stay, so I locked every door, every window, and the 3 front and back gates, and went away. Next morning, Alcide packed my valise, and leaving him in charge of my apartments, I took the Orient Express for Constantinople. During the 2 years that I wandered to the east, and at first our letters we never mentioned Genevieve and Boris, but gradually their names crept in. I recollect particularly a passage in one of Jack's letters replying to one of mine. What you tell me of seeing Boris bending over you while you lay ill, and feeling his touch on your face, and hearing his voice, of course troubles me. This that you describe must have happened a fortnight after he died. I say to myself that you were dreaming, that it was part of your delirium, but the explanation does not satisfy me, nor would it you. Toward the end of the second year, a letter came from Jack to me in India, so unlike anything else I had ever known of him, that I decided to return to Paris at once. He wrote, "I am well. I sell all my pictures, as artists do who have no need of money. I have not a care of my own, but I am more restless than if I had. I am unable to shake off the strange anxiety about you. It is not apprehension, it is rather a breathless expectancy. Of what, God knows. I can only say it is wearing me out. Nights I dream always of you and Boris. I can never recall anything afterwards, but I wake in the morning with my heart beating, and all day the excitement increases until I fall asleep at night to recall the same experience. I'm quite exhausted by it, and have determined to break up this morbid condition. I must see you. Shall I go to Bombay, or will you come to Paris?" Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think he was making statues from the victims, but I think he wanted to do that. And I think the implication is that he like fucking tossed her in there because he was like, yeah, because like that would have been an angle. Like, oh, he's making his statues by throwing them in the pool, but like there's sort of this like kind of gothic romantic kind of angle where he's like, for whatever reason, he like tossed Genevieve in there in a way because he was like, I like to preserve her beauty or something. I don't know. I telegraphed him to expect me on the next steamer. When we met, I thought he had changed very little. He insisted, looked in resplendent health. It was good to hear his voice again, and as we sat and chatted about what life still held for us, we felt that it was pleasant to be alive and to bring spring weather, and the bright spring weather. We stayed in Paris together a week, and then I went for a week to Epte with him. But first of all, we went to the cemetery at Sevres, where Boris lay. "Shall we place the Fates in the little grove above him?" Jack asked, and I answered, "I think only the Madonna should watch over Boris's grave." But Jack was none the better for my homecoming. The dreams of which he could not retain even the least definite outline continued, and he said that at times the sense of breathless expectancy was suffocating. "You see, I do you harm and not good," I said. "Try a change without me." So we started alone. He started alone for a rambling among the Channel Islands, and I went back to Paris. It's a cool angle, and I was recalling a book where he cast his victims in bronze medals and made them into furniture. I think I remember that. There was I'll have to find it. There was like an old timey movie that also had that kind of thing going on, where there was a guy who would murder people, and then he would pour clay over them and like make the statue around the body. I had not yet entered Boris's house, now mine since my return, but I knew it must be done. It had been kept in order by Jack. There were servants there, so I gave up my own apartment and went to live there. Instead of the agitation I had feared, I found myself able to paint there tranquilly. I visited all the rooms, all but one. I could not bring myself to enter the marble room where Genevieve lay, and yet I felt the longing growing daily to look upon her face, to kneel beside her. Also, can someone help me understand? Don't worry. You think you're lost? I'm also weirdly lost. Basically, an artist made some goo that turns people into statues. His girlfriend fell in, and he died of sadness. Now the narrator's sad because he also loved the dead girl. Yeah, that's about right. Sounds about right. I was under the impression that he put her in there, but if she fell in, that makes more sense. One April afternoon, I lay dreaming in the smoking room, just as I had laid 2 years before, and mechanically I looked among the tawny eastern rugs for the wolfskin. At last I distinguished the pointed ears and flat, cruel head, and I thought of the dream where I saw Genevieve lying beside it. The helmet still hung against the threadbare tapestry, among them the old Spanish morion which I had remembered Genevieve had once put on, and we were amusing ourselves with the ancient bits of mail. I turned my eyes to the spinet. Every yellow key seemed eloquent of her caressing hand, and I rose, drawn by the strength of my life's passion, to the sealed door of the marble room. The heavy doors swung inward under my trembling hands. Sunlight poured through the window, tipping with gold to the wings of Cupid, and lingered like a nimbus over the brows of Madonna. Her tender face bent in compassion over a marble form so exquisitely pure that I knew and sighed to myself. Genevieve lay in the shadow under Madonna, and yet, through her white arms, I saw the pale azure vein, and beneath her softly clasped hands the folds of her dress were tinged with rose, as if from some faint warm light within her breast. Bending with a breaking heart, I touched the marble drapery with my lips, then crept back to the silent house. A maid came and brought me a letter. I sat down in the little conservatory to read it. But as I was about to break the seal, seeing the girl lingering, I asked her what she wanted. She stammered something about a white rabbit that had been caught in the house, and asked what we should do with it. I told her to let it loose in the walled garden behind the house, and opened my letter. It was from Jack, but so incoherent I thought he must have lost his reason. It was nothing but a series of prayers to me not to leave the house until he could get back. He could not tell me why. There were dreams, he said. He could explain nothing, but he was sure that I must not leave the house in Rue Saint Cecile. As I finished reading, I raised my eyes and saw the same maidservant standing in the doorway holding a glass dish in which two goldfish were swimming. Put them back in the tank, and tell me what you mean by interrupting me, I said. With a half-suppressed whimper, she emptied the water and fish into an aquarium at the end of the conservatory, and turning to me, asked my permission to leave my service. She said people were playing tricks on her, evidently with the design of getting her into trouble. The marble rabbit had been stolen, and a live one had been brought into the house. The two beautiful marble fish were gone, and she had just found those common live things flopping on the dining room floor. I reassured her and sent her away, saying I would look about myself. I went into the studio. There was nothing there but my canvases and some casts, except for the marble of the Easter lily. I saw it on the table across the room. Then I strode angrily over to it. But the flower I lifted from the table was fresh and fragile, and filled the air with perfume. Then I suddenly comprehended, and sprang through the hallway to the marble room. The doors flew open, and sunlight streamed into my face, and through it, in a heavenly glory, the Madonna smiled, as Genevieve lifted her flustered face from her marble couch and opened her sleepy eyes. I'm not gonna lie, that gave me like a little chill at the end. That gave me a little chill at the end. That could have ended very sadly and tragically. That was a really cool way to like end that. Hey, there's someone put a fucking rabbit in here. There's some like fish running around. This one was really confusing to me the first time I read it. Yeah, I can see why. that one, because like I'm not even sure I would have completely understood it if you hadn't given me like a decent kind of in a nutshell of it. Yeah, it's very sweet and mildly creepy. I actually quite like it. This story is actually more indicative of the overall tone of the book than the first story. I am very okay with that because I've actually really liked that and I actually really enjoyed reading it. It's sweet, like a dead bird from your stalker. Damn it, Jared Leto, get out of here. Jared Leto, Joker, is that you sending dead birds to people? Oy, oy, oy. Okay. That was really good. I actually might want to pick this back up on Tuesday. I was having a real good time with that. Um Ew, not Jared Leto. He's gonna morb. He's gonna morb. I open up the stream on Tuesday and I'm like, hey, we were gonna read more of The King in Yellow, but instead I opted to. I'm gonna show you the 240p GIF version of Morbius that's going around Tumblr. We're gonna watch the entirety of Morbius. He morbed on my couch. Morbing. I'm morbing. Oh god, I'm morbing. I was watching my little character move when I smacked my lips. I'm just like what if you replace Dunny with a gif of the entirety of Morbius? It's just the gif. It's just the Morbius gif sitting here on the chair. We just open it up and it's like, I've been morbed. Oh yeah. Okay, Dorbius. Let's look. There's a lot of Dunny fusions that I've done in the past. Let's not make Dunbius one of them. Okay. Well, I think we'll call that a stream for today. TV head Dunny shut up, but he only plays Morbius. Man, if I could figure out how to do that as like an April Fool's joke, that'd be really funny. Excuse me, that'd be really funny. Just be a TV head character, but the TV is just playing Morbius at 240p in GIF form. Anyway. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and call that a good, successful stream for today. This was really fun. I like this, like, a lot. I actually really like how this is written. It's, I know we keep making Lovecraft comparisons, but it still has kind of a unique flavor all its own. I think I like that second story, like, a lot. Like, a lot more than the first one. Just because, like, I kind of like the gothic nature of it. You know? Not gothic as in, like, ooh, spooky, hey, I'm the Dracula. But, like, gothic in terms of, like gothic romanticism. You know what I mean? And yeah, exactly. Like, it predating Lovecraft. It's just, man, you just have that he was inspired by Robert. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was looking up. I was doing a little bit of research at the start of the stream, and I was looking up like what the connection was between this and Lovecraft. Like, how did the King in Yellow, how did Hastur become a Lovecraftian thing when it was written by Robert Chambers? And yeah, Lovecraft was just like, yo, I like that shit. And he just started peppering it in various stories for shits and giggles. Lovecraft was especially inspired by the racism. He saw the racism and went, he took it to heart. You know what? Because we were talking about how if you can just fight racism with racism, you end racism. And Lovecraft was trying to do that. He was like, I see the racism and I'm going to fight it with more racism. And eventually it was fine. You get that battery you were looking for? And you got the Wendy's?
Yes.
Wendy's? Wendy's? My partner has arrived with Wendy's, so he turned up the racism to, oh god, I'm Welsh. Okay, well, my partner Did he get a Frosty? Yes, we both got Frosties. I really want a Frosty. My throat hurts. But yeah, when Wendy's and my partner have arrived, I'm gonna eat Wendy's and also kiss his big dumb stupid head that I love. Um, my where'd you go? Chat says they love you.
I love you too, chat.
He loves you too, chat. All right. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Love you all. Have your excuse me, machine elves. I will not eat my partner. Oh, you meant like eat him like food. uh Man, we almost made it through this stream without like a lewd joke. Anyway, but yeah, so we'll go ahead vor. Vor? Oh my god, you're right.
Just come help me bore these burgers already.
I gotta go vor the burgers. Alright. Love y'all. Thanks for coming. See y'all again on Tuesday. Maybe we'll pick this up again, maybe we won't. The stream is now out. Everyone have a lovely evening.